All set? Happy New Year, everybody. I'd like to call our January the 10th meeting to order of our town council. Could I have a pledge of allegiance, please? I'm sorry, Michael, I didn't see you had stepped out. Roll call, please. Here.
Here. Here. Here.
Okay. We have three sets of minutes under tabs 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and 4. The first one is our town council meeting of November the 7th. Could I have a motion to approve, please?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Mr. Chairman, I just have some minor, more typographical types of edits that I'll provide to the clerk.
Okey-doke.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Next set is under tab 2. This is our special call town council meeting on November the 28th. Could I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
Again, Mr. Chairman, some minor typographical changes, but there does appear to be something substantively missing on page 6 towards the bottom. And it seems like there's a gap in the discussion. If you look just before the bolded language. Go back and,
Oh, I see. It starts with the
Starts with to
2,
include.
small t.
yeah. It seems like there's a sentence or two missing in there. So. Yeah, okay. But other than that, that was the only substantive change.
Do you wish to approve it
Subject to
subject to,
reviewing the record and making whatever additions are necessary to kind of complete the thought there.
okay, perfect. With that, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Tab 3 is the December 5th. It's in progress. Tab 4 is December the 19th, the special call. Can I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
For a second?
Second?
Again, discussion?
Only discussion is I have no comments on this one, and I want to commend the town clerk for providing such thorough minutes. I know it's a lot of work. Thank you.
Always, always. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So approved. Updates. I worked on a letter that all of you will be receiving, hopefully soon. And if I may, I'm going to read it to you. It's a message from me to my Kiowa neighbors. Last year, the council voted to change the election cycle to odd years at the request of the Charleston County Election Commission, therefore extending our next election to November of 2025. That change extended the mayor's, town council's term limit by 1 year. While this change was encouraged by the governor and state legislatures and supported by myself and the Council of Kiowa, I am writing to inform you that I will be resigning as mayor effective March 31 of this year. This decision has not been made lightly, but after careful consideration, I have decided to end my term early. A special election will be held on April the 2nd, 2024 for the position of mayor. I think it is vital that the new mayor has longer than 12 months and be able to work with Stephanie, our new town attorney, the council on this current agenda of issues. The town will be sending out communications on the special election process and timeline for submission of credentials soon. I thank you for the opportunity and honor of being the mayor of Kiowa these last 3.5 years It has been truly a privilege to serve. I have learned a great deal during my tenure, and I am thankful for the support and collaboration with my colleagues. Our residents are the heart of this island, and I look forward to seeing the great endeavors you continue to foster and grow in the years to come. I wish you all the best. So that will be going out right now. Michael?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I have a few topics that I wanted to report on. I know that many community members had looked forward to a presentation that was planned by Kiowa Island Utilities about our water quality. I think some of you started to be alerted about reports that came in about certain criteria not being fulfilled. So we were looking forward to that presentation, but unfortunately, due to our schedule change, they were not able to come. My understanding, Stephanie, is that this presentation will be held in February, so that also community members can ask questions. I was also looking forward to a presentation by Berkeley Electric about frequent recent power outages that we have seen in certain portions of the island, especially in December and in November. And when I say frequent, I just recorded those that were at my house, and they were more than frequent. Unfortunately, they were not able to provide, despite the change from yesterday, of our schedule from yesterday to today, they were not able to make our schedule work. So we would also hope that they will come in February and report on the reasons for these power outages. Since we speak about vendors, I want to make another quick comment about our police department. I've done that, unfortunately, over the last couple of meeting sessions. Not only have we, I think, seen less police coverage, and as we talked about this morning in our Ways and Means, also seen less additional coverage by our off-duty officers here on the island. As in past months, I just wanted to bring one incident to the attention of the community. A couple of weeks, probably more days ago, we had at least two incidences which were supposed to be a potential threat of a use of a firearm. In the first incident, our fire department was there in 3 minutes. The police took 7 minutes. Even worse, the second incident at the same address, it took the police 14 minutes to come to site. As I mentioned in earlier meetings, I just find it unacceptable for the community and would encourage us as a community to start a more detailed discussion about how we want to deal with this lack of coverage and potentially at least find ways to resolve this, maybe even leading to our own police force at some point in time. On a better note, similar though, as it relates to our EMS coverage, also again in our drop-in meeting this morning, it became a topic. I hear this a lot whenever there is an incident, that we don't have a full-time 24/7 EMS truck on the island. We do have some days and times where we have off-duty and freelance paramedics that are serving our island, stationed at fire station number 6, but they're not around the clock available to us. And I think we need to consider having a full-time EMS truck on the island. So I'm happy that I can report that our discussions with the fire department is progressing in a sense that we want more of our fire department personnel to be fully trained paramedics, which of course will create a cost and time effort that we are willing to support. I'm also happy that I think, maybe not at the same speed, but still progressing in discussions with the Charleston County for a full-time EMS truck on the island, where we also as a town, as a community, might need to do some startup financing for making this happen. But we continue working on this very intensively, since I believe we need a better coverage also by paramedics on the island. Number 5, as also in prior meetings, just want to report on a couple of budget items, as some of you might have seen in the documentation for the Ways and Means 23-24 budget, we already have exceeded our legal fees that we were originally planning for this year. So all the money for legal has already been spent in 6 months. And just for transparency, I don't want to discourage anybody to file FOIA requests, but we need to understand that they are creating quite a bit of expense for the town. We had 2 big ones just in Q4 of 23, and they each resulted in substantial legal fees to handle it, just to handle them. That's part of the reason why we are already have reached our budget. Number 6, I would like to request the staff, Stephanie in particular, and then that goes on to John Taylor in the very back, to please work with the Planning Commission on considering to rezone the entire Captain Sam Spit parcel into parks and recreation. This is what it is, and this is what it should be, and I think we all should be very passionate about this. The orderly process, similar to what we've done in November and December, is to look at rezoning, and I think that would be a very proper way of changing what we all believe should be reality for the unforeseeable future. Thank you, Mayor.
Russ?
Thanks. So I have 4 things of significance I want to talk about. One has to do to piggyback on top of what Mr. Heidenfelder said with respect to the police. I had an incident on the island, I'm not going to go into details, where an extremely aggressive driver pulled in right behind me when I was on Kiawah Island Parkway, and after I pulled over on the shoulder and wouldn't move. A learning situation for me. I intentionally elected not to call 911 because I am on the island, on town council, and I know how poor the police response time was. It turns out that was a mistake because the police were on the island anyway, but I called the front gate, and the front gate initially said, they can't help, you have to call 911, and I said, I need assistance now, not in 30 minutes. But it all turned out to be a non-event, but what I wanted to let you guys know is that because of that situation, we are revisiting how to improve the police presence on the island. That has to be done. Second is with respect to beach damage. Not the storm we had yesterday, but the storm we had about a week or so ago, the big rain event where there was flooding all over the island. I went on the beach afterwards. We do a daily walk. And I noticed a pattern where the private boardwalks were stopping prior to the last line of dunes. Those individuals then would walk over the dunes, obviously, because that's the only way to get to the beach. In every instance where I saw the boardwalk ending prior to the dunes, the first line of defense was broken. Water had gotten through that first line of defense, probably because the pathway was worn down or so, or whatever it happened to be. So I brought this up about 6 months or so ago, and I'm bringing it up again. We have to, as town council, we have to do something to make sure residents are not walking over those sand dunes. It has to be done. And I'm going to challenge this for the next retreat that we're going to have next month in February. We have to enforce nobody walking over these dunes. Third item has to do with the Cape. I just wanted to let you guys know is that one of the problems that we've had with respect to the parking on the Cape has to do with beach parking. I discovered when all of the interests became known with respect to the shortfall of parking spots, I went through the ordinances. We don't have an ordinance for those who want to park at the club and just go to the beach. At the beach club, they have a problem with insufficient parking for those who want to go just to the beach. And it seems that I'm wary and very worried that the Cape can have the same thing, the same problem, where people who just want to park and go to the beach, not visit the pool, not visit any of the facilities, they're going to overcrowd the limited amount of parking spots. So I just want to let you know, we do not have an ordinance for that. And that number is not in what is the parking spot calculation right now for the property. Lastly, I think we should create a subcommittee of individuals that are going to help us solve the situation for the Cape. Offline, I've received a lot of comments, a lot of discussions with people who have actually come up with some creative solutions of what to do. I would like to set up a forum of some sort to collect that information rather than having it bombard everybody on IKEA. I'd love to capture that in a special committee, a forum, or something, and we're going to bring that up also then, in my mind, in next month's retreat. That will be it, sir.
Brad?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A few informational updates and then comment on a couple things that my fellow council members have raised. There is, just for informational purposes, a town hall or community forum with regard to discussion and obtaining community input on the ARB task force, scheduled for January 22nd. There's been a lot of response to the Phase 2 report that was issued by the task force. Extraordinary amount of work went into that. I commend all my fellow task force members. But now this will be the opportunity for community input on what's the best path to move forward in ultimately, hopefully transitioning control of the ARB from the developer to the community. Exactly how that's architected, we need to work through. But as you heard from Jordan Phillips at one of the most recent council meetings, there is apparently a willingness on the part of the developer to effect a transition over a period of time, and this will be an opportunity to begin that discussion. Councilmember Heidingsfelder and I hosted earlier today a community drop-in, and it was at 9 o'clock in the morning in the Sandcastle, and surprisingly well attended for early in the morning. And it was actually a pretty robust and substantive discussion on a wide range of issues, and touching upon a couple things that have already been alluded to: emergency management services and safety and security. One topic of conversation that really resonated with me, and would also encourage the community to continue to provide input to the Planning Commission, is with regard to the adoption of the comprehensive plan. And to everybody understand how critically important that document is on a go-forward basis for kind of shaping what we want Kiowa to be in the future. What is the vision for Kiowa? It's got to be move beyond just checking the boxes that are required by state law in terms of some data and recommendations that need to be made, but really what is it we see as a community as to the future of Kiowa Island. And the Planning Commission has a lot of work in front of it yet, but it requires more community input. There is tomorrow afternoon, right at this time, or 2 o'clock, there is another community forum. This will be an opportunity. I will be joined by council members from Charleston City, Charleston County, and Seabrook. Newly elected council member from Seabrook just got seated a week ago. Newly elected council member from Charleston County. His district is actually the portion of Johns Island that's been annexed into Charleston City. And then 2 council members from Charleston County, Jenny Honeycutt, who were in her district. The rest of Johns Island is in Joe Boykin's district. This will be an opportunity to talk about island-wide, I'm talking not Kiowa Island-wide, but Johns Island-wide issues that impact upon all of us. Not to say that we can't talk about Kiowa issues, but I expect that we will hear an update and have discussion around transportation-related initiatives. That's obviously the Main Road Corridor project, particularly Segment C that directly impacts Lower Johns Island, as well as the Mark Clark Extension, what's happening at the River and Maybank intersection. For any of you who go off island early in the morning or come back later in the day, that intersection is just a nightmare. I anticipate there will be some discussion of other issues that have been of interest, particularly the availability of medical services more closely accessible than Mount Pleasant or West Ashley or Charleston. And we hopefully will get updates on MUSC, the Trident Complex, as well as the Island Park Place, or so-called Health and Wellness Village, that's been proposed just a couple hundred yards up the road. In that latter regard, after the last Charleston County meeting, I was asked by the developer and the council to, and agreed to facilitate a conversation, I think is the best way to describe it, between community interest on Johns Island and the developer. We had one such meeting. It was actually very constructive, went for something like 3 hours. No decisions were made with regard to that. It wasn't that type of meeting. It was simply kind of compare notes. And what was conveyed to the developer was based on two separate surveys, one undertaken by Kiowa, the town of Kiowa Island, another one taken by the Johns Island Task Force and Johns Island Advocate. 3/4 to 80% of residents on Kiowa, Seabrook, and Johns Island opposed the Island Park Place development as it was proposed, primarily for scope and scale reasons, the range of permitted uses, and environmental concerns. The developer came back with some thoughts and suggestions that dealt with restricted uses and some other potential commitments, but nothing related to the overall scope and scale of the project. The community members made clear that there wasn't going to be any community support without further substantive changes in that regard, and the developer said they would come back with a revised proposal. That hasn't happened to my knowledge. I don't know yet whether this is still going to be on the calendar for first reading before Charleston County later in the month. I believe they actually had to make a decision, or they have to let the council know today, the clerk, as to whether or not they're going to keep that on the calendar. I just want to comment on one matter that Councilmember Heidingsfelder raised with regard to legal cost. They've been much higher than anticipated, and given what has transpired with regard to Sam Spit, and I'll touch upon that in a minute, it may be that legal cost will continue to increase. I do take some exception to putting the blame for legal cost related to FOIA request on the community members. The public is entitled to submit FOIA requests. That's what FOIA is all about. All of the legal cost was a function of the town making its decision not to provide the requested information. It was within the town's prerogative to do so. It was also within the town's prerogative, if there was an available defense or reason not to provide it, to not do so. But the town could have. And if the town had simply provided the memo that had been requested, there would have been no legal expense whatsoever. So I really do take exception to putting that onus on the community members who are pursuing their rights under the state FOIA statute.
Can I comment on this, Brian?
Pardon?
Can I comment on this?
Certainly.
So first of all, I haven't blamed. I have just provided transparency. I explicitly said, and that's not a blame for me, maybe that's my English, but said I just want to have transparency, and I certainly don't want to discourage. I just want to make people understand that there are costs involved. First of all, the first attempt or the first case was purely requesting us to deliver documents. There was no attempt by the town to deny. We delivered, but as it is practice, we delivered it through our legal counsel, and he charged his hours for that. Second case was indeed, something that we had to take to court because the majority of the town was of the opinion that the request was not warranted, and the judge gave us the right, or gave us, a decision that we were actually right doing so. Just want to make sure that the record is straight here.
Okay, and inappropriate use of the term blame. Nonetheless, under FOIA, the town can provide all it could have provided. It was within the town's prerogative to provide the document requested, in which case, if that had been done, there wouldn't have been any legal expenses associated with that. It was only the town deciding to not provide the legal memorandum that led to the legal
But
expenditures.
the judge ruled in our favor, so I don't know why you would think that we should have given him the documents anyway, when the judge ruled we were correct. I don't understand that.
It's not a matter of whether the town was legally entitled to withhold the document. That was the judge's ruling. But the town doesn't have to withhold the document in the first instance. It's within the town's prerogative to provide.
That's a silly argument. The judge ruled that we are correct. That's.
He only
Move on,
ruled
move
that,
on.
the only ruling, Councilmember Berner,
Moved on.
was that
The town was correct.
was the town was within its rights to withhold it, but the statute specifically says it doesn't have to be withheld. It can be provided, that's all. Sam Spit, perhaps I agree with looking at with Councilmember Heidingsfelder with regard to potentially rezoning that. That appears to be something that was specifically contemplated in the ARDA. I might just suggest that as be designated conservation district rather than PNR. But that would be the only difference with regard to that. I think everybody is now aware with regard to the Spit. It went out publicly, it went out in the town's notice that the town has now sent a demand letter to the developer with regard to its view that the obligations undertaken by the property owner in the ARDA need to be complied with, and it's a fairly detailed and I think very strong and thoughtful letter that was prepared by our outside counsel, so I commend that to your attention. Council member Berner touched upon at least some of the zoning issues and focused on parking. I would note that there are actually now pending 4 different site plans. The community is paying attention to or needs to pay attention to. One is still with regard to the upper Beachwalker parcels, the church parcel and parcel 11, the West End project. Obviously, most of the attention's been focused on the Ocean Pines project. Somewhat related to that is the Cape Point Road extension, a site plan, and we've also had a site plan been submitted by the resort with respect to the new proposed amenities building on Night Heron Park. The one concern I do have, and I'm not quite clear what its implications are or what its purpose would be, this idea of some task force or subcommittee to look at parking related issues. My view is that and I think as a matter of law that an applicant is required to, submitting a site plan or any zoning, seeking any zoning permit, is required to comply with applicable zoning standards, full stop. If it wants to seek a variance from the strict application of those zoning standards, there's a process for doing that, going through the BZA. There isn't any kind of concept of negotiating zoning standards. It's not something that an individual property owner can do, and that shouldn't be anything that a commercial property owner should be able to do. You need consistency and transparency in the application of zoning standards. Now, what I think is useful is to perhaps have a conversation about, as per Tim Hazel's email, which I thought was very thoughtful, and that may have been what you were referring to, what are the potential legally valid paths to be able to potentially address the parking situation. But at the end of the day, it's the applicant's obligation to comply with the zoning standards. It's their issue to deal with. And if they either have to comply with the zoning standards, they have to comply with the request of the planning director, conditions imposed, or they have to seek a variance, and that's kind of it. The one point I would note about you're absolutely right. There is not, and probably something we need to look at, a specific parking ordinance that applies to beach-related parking, but 1228 does provide the planning director with the authority to require overflow parking, to require parking in addition to the very numeric, very technical minimum requirements specified for per number of residents, per square foot of a restaurant, per square foot of a pool, et cetera. But I agree that we may want to strengthen that. The last matter, I just want to comment upon the mayor's announcement. I hope I'm not telling any tales out of school here, Mr. Mayor, is that even before I came on council and subsequent thereto, you had, indicated at a couple of occasions that, boy, there were some challenges that came along with the job that were a little bit more than you had ever anticipated. And having done 2 stints in public sector at the federal level myself, I know it can often be a thankless job. I do want to note that, but prior to the time that I ran for council and every interaction we had then and subsequent thereto, I found that you've handled issues with extraordinary grace and equanimity, and you've been extraordinarily respectful to your colleagues on the council as well to all of the members of the community at every turn, and for that, I think we should all be very grateful. Thank you.
Okay, a lot going on. Stephanie?
Yes, before I turn over to Mr. Taylor, who's going to do a kind of an update in regards to all the projects on Beach Walker, I just would like to provide a few updates. The Kiawah Island Beach Walker intersection improvement that you all approved, we finally have completed the bid documents, and those are scheduled to go out, hopefully, well, they're scheduled to go out this week, and they're going to be due back February 7th. So we'll see what the costs come in for that. But again, once it comes in, it goes through Ways and Means and Council for consideration and approval. For those on Beach Walker Drive that's been asking about the landscaping, so what we're doing right now is they're going to start doing some demo on Beach Walker and Kiawah Island Park. When we say demo, that's just pulling out some of the plants there. The goal is to the schedule now, the goal is to have that done by the end of February. And then the end of March, they plan on having everything planted, so the timing works out a little bit better because we're going to be doing so all the plants, I was told, would be in by the end of March. So during springtime, all the beach walkers should start looking really good, spring and summer, because everything will be completed by then. But we're going to start seeing some demo work started there. The third thing is that, as council members have asked, the town has scheduled a hazardous household waste collection. That's going to be held on February 8th at noon here at Town Hall. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Taylor, who's going to come on up. And while he's coming up, I know Mr. Bell, he has said something about MUSC. So Dr. Cawley, right now, I have him potentially scheduled to come to council meeting at the February agenda. So we're going to have a lot of updates, one from MUSC, probably from in the Berkeley Electric and the Kiawah Island Utility.
Stephanie, before John starts, so when we have another representative of the MUSC here in February, the most questions I receive about this is not the emergency room. I think we all understand what that is, but community members want to have more details about what other practices, doctors' offices, will be located at the building here in Freshfields. So people are really interested to see if their particular doctor, not as a person, but as a profession, covering certain parts of the body, I guess, will be, located here, or if they still need to go to Somerville or West Ashley or somewhere.
I'll make sure.
I think that's the key for that presentation, or should be the key for that
And
presentation.
Stephanie, one, it's not exactly follow, but just tangentially related to what you were talking about, Beach Walker and KIP. I am only asking this because as driving back here at 1 o'clock, I noticed it. What is our contract with our landscape vendor provide with regard to post-storm cleanup? The reason I ask the question is when headed to the drop-in this morning at 9 o'clock, large crews out clearing everything along Kiowa Island Parkway past the gate. Everything was being cleaned up very, very quickly. As of 1 o'clock today, nothing earlier today, there were two, I think, Artigues guys with blowers walking along Kiowa Island Parkway trail, simply blowing debris off, not picking up anything. There wasn't a truck anywhere. They hadn't begun to touch anything around the front gate. It was perfectly spotless clean just beyond the front gate. Still a mess before the front gate, and nothing had been touched on Beach Walker. What do we expect, or what requirement do we impose on our contractor?
Yeah, so normally, we have various contracts after a storm. So Artigues, what I know Brian and Michael did was they did ask for them to come out today and do some cleanup. Normally, if it is a larger event, we have more of our debris companies come, but I have to confirm with Brian and Mark. I know Artigues was out here, so they should be picking up the debris as well as blowing, so I will look into that because they should be picking it up and not just blowing it, I guess, on the, in our, so we'll look into that.
Well, Wednesdays is their usual day that they come out, Stephanie, to Mondays, Wednesday, Fridays are the 3 days that they usually come out for Beach Walker Drive and Kiowa Island Parkway. So I would assume what you saw this morning, and I saw actually 3 people, but
You're
still
right, I did see
no
a
truck.
third, a separate one at a different location, that's right.
But that was just part of their regular schedule.
Yeah, and we did ask them to come and do some additional because of the storm, so I'll have to confirm.
Right. And then, since we are coming from different ends of the island, you have had the shorter commute to the Sand Castle this morning. I came all the way the other way. It was still a mess. So they were just,
okay.
at that time, just blowing around the first gate. So we don't need to be too jealous, but it is a topic that we probably need to address, yes.
So, Mayor, members
Remember,
of
it was
council.
9 o'clock in the morning that you guys saw this. That's not bad. I think there were a lot of other communities who weren't
Oh, yeah.
seeing cleanup.
No.
John, you got a sport coat on, so this must be serious.
Threw me off, Mayor. Stephanie asked that I just kind of share a status of all the projects on Beach Walker Drive. Many of them already been highlighted by members of council. There are essentially 3 projects now under site plan review. Those particular projects, commonly known the West End, which would be referred to most people known as Upper Beach Walker Project, the Ocean Pines Project, which is on parcel 13, lot 1, and then more recently submitted, which is an access drive off of Cape Point and an emergency beach access. So all 3 of those projects are still under currently site plan review. I wanted to reassure that no site plan review approvals have been granted for either of those projects. And as part of this, which has been highlighted regarding the parking concerns, particularly on the Cape Beach Club, I'll provide just a quick update and summary of the status of what's being now reviewed. The Cape Beach Club parking that was highlighted as part of the overall development plans for parcel 13, the principal development in the Cape project, those parking spaces that are associated or required based on the actual beach club parking is where the shortfall have been identified for this particular project. Those are being requested by the developer to be addressed, and they've put together a plan to address those parking deficiencies based on the issued comments provided by the planning department. We've also notified East-West Partners, as you all are aware, that this particular project in itself, those 2 entities essentially are working together to develop this project, even though East-West Partners is a property owner and the principal developer of the site. The actual club will still be operated by Kiowa Partners. As part of that process, as I said, we've notified those entities of the parking concerns. In addition, we also notified what I would call the 3rd tier of the parent tract of this area, parcel 13, which would be the Timbers. As you recall, Timbers was approved in 2016. That particular project is the only one now that's active. Cape is under construction. The Ocean Pines project is that site. It's going through the permitting process. Regarding the Timbers particular project, at the time of approval of that particular project, the number of employees have grown since that time. And so as part of that, what we have done is contacted the Timbers property management and to ask them to provide an updated plan to address their additional parking based on their employment. They've historically have had a temporary parking situation for their overflow of employees on the adjacent lot of where the Ocean Pines site is. We know that that particular lot will be developed. And so there will address those particular concerns by them independent of the Cape and Ocean Pines. Moving forward with,
John, could you just take a second? I can imagine on the listserv, there's an inordinate amount of explanation or interpretation. Just take a moment and explain the relationship between these sites and how they all are affected by your upper point, in terms of the Ocean Pines project.
I didn't provide a map, but just to orient folks, parcel 13 is identified in the 2013 amended and restated development agreement originally as one parcel. It was further broken down by development projects, which Timbers would have been the first one to come online. That's a multifamily, 21 units. Everyone's aware of where these are located, but as far as the association with them, these are essentially three different independent projects. But they've all have kind of operated essentially in a commonality of it being parcel 13 as being planned together, even though they were developed in phases, being planned and designed collectively in nature being part of that parent tract because the entitlements were based on the parent tract of parcel 13. I don't know if that does any justice to what
That's where
you
the
were.
parking comes into play.
That
Is
one?
that where the parking comes into play?
So the parking for each project or just for the Timbers?
The point of emphasis is Ocean Pine Lot 1 is holding the parking for the, just
Yeah.
just
You
explain.
jumped it, yeah. So essentially, as Timbers was developed, the second project that came online was the Cape. The Cape's parking, residential and with the beach club. The beach club component is the sort of problem child, I'm gonna use for lack of better words here, in the whole situation of being able to identify the parking that is associated with the beach club itself. That particular beach club parking, like I said, that's been presented to the developer and showing what the actual number of spaces that have been allocated or required. I will share that we have received 2 updated site plans to reflect their attempt to mitigate those required parking spaces. The substantial principal amount of those would be on the Ocean Pines lot. And what was referenced at a previous meeting, that town council meeting, that the partners had removed 2 of their buildings from the original site plan that was presented for Ocean Pines on parcel 13, lot 1. So that revised site plan has been submitted for review, and I'll get to sort of review status in a moment. What the third project is the Ocean Pines project outside of Timbers, now in the Cape, and then Ocean Pines. The Ocean Pines site, as it being under site plan review, we have issued the comments associated to ensure that those parking deficiencies are met based on the beach club identified for the Cape project site. Where we are today is that each of those projects have been submitted for site plan review. Comments have been issued, and through this whole process, we've hired a third-party engineering firm to run a peer review of those particular plans to ensure that they're consistent with code, and additionally make sure that stormwater management was addressed. That was a big concern that we did hear from the community in addressing stormwater concerns. And so just a status update, this has taken some time by the review team. Just on December 29th is when we actually had our site visit. They prepared comments, a memo. We've published that memo online for the Upper Beachwalker project. The memo for the Ocean Pines has not been published because they've submitted a new site plan, and the review team has not had a chance to provide comments on that new site plan that has been submitted. Furthermore, as part of that, we saw it best, myself, to actually have Weston and Sampson as being a third-party engineering. If there were questions regarding what their memo had shared, we're adjusting their contract to amend that they can present a sort of a public setting to be able to review their assessment independent of the town's review, so that we provide additional comfortability to the community in that process. As far as a timeline, like I said, the comments have been presented back to the developer. I believe that as reviewing Weston and Sampson's initial review, this is just kind of a general statement here that the Upper Beachwalker project is probably more advanced as far as being in a complete state of addressing all the particular concerns, opposed to the Ocean Pines particular project. And the third project that I'll highlight briefly would have been the emergency beach access project adjacent to Cape Point Drive. That is part of what I mentioned, the principal attempt to solidify or address all of the parking needs for the beach club, and having a share of those be addressed in parking needs adjacent to the Ocean Pines site. We've issued comments. The developer has been able to share some engagement back and forth. We've been trying to understand they've been trying to understand some of the comments I've presented, and so we have not gotten anything back officially yet, but that's a working process, just as our normal site plan review, that will go back and forth until all of the things have been addressed. So that's sort of an overall summary of kind of an update of where we are on all of the Beachwalker projects.
John, before you leave, thank you for that update, very helpful. I think what folks are struggling with is how, in the first instance, how did we get to the point that we are, where, with the timbers first, which I understand, I believe, was actually overseen by the Charleston County planning staff at that point in time. But my recollection from looking at the parking table is that it wasn't just an issue of the growth of the employee workforce since then. The parking table itself showed from the get-go that the required number of parking spaces, which were, I believe, 50, weren't actually provided on the timber site as required. And that is the issue that's arisen with regard to the Cape even more particularly. People are struggling to understand that how could the site plan have been approved for the Cape without any parking for the Cape Club facilities on the Cape parcel, which is something that's required by our ordinance. And so that's been part of the challenge, and because of that's what transpired, trying to now fit a square peg into a round hole has been the signal challenge. And I appreciate your comment letter, and particularly the one on which I thought was very thoughtful, dated November 13th, where you identified that 88 parking spaces were required for the club, and then an additional 25 spaces for area beach parking, which I assumed was you're exercising your discretion under 1228 to require additional overflow parking. But those were conditions to approval of the Ocean Pines site plan. The revised site plan subsequent to that was submitted doesn't have 88 on the Ocean Pine site, and it doesn't have the 25 extra beach parking that were reflected in your comment letter. And so at the end of the day, and again, as I stated in my initial comments, I believe that as a matter of law, that it's applicant's obligation to fully comply with all relevant zoning standards. And I don't think you have discretion to add parking. I don't believe you have discretion to waive parking requirements. And if I'm wrong, certainly point out a relevant provision. So that the only path forward, other than some of these suggestions were offered by a community member, is for the applicant to seek a variance from anything that doesn't require with the strict standards of the zoning code.
So I'll try to answer the many questions that you threw out there. The first, I think, more generally is how do we get here? As you stated, the Timbers project was permitted in 2016 under the county's review and standards. At that time, it checked all boxes based on that review. I think the differences between that particular project and the Cape project is the actual use. And that was a mistake on my part of looking at the differences between how the actual amenity facility would be used. That's an independent review in a community itself. Timbers is community itself, and the Cape was presented at least in understanding that would be itself a community itself, and so the requirements are differently when you look at that compared to that of a commercial beach club. So, be that what it is, the attempt to mitigate those deficiencies of what has been identified to the developer to address those. The second part I think you highlighted was looking at what the parking standards are. Those comments have been issued relative to Ocean Pines, relative to the Cape and the beach club's efficiencies. We'll go through that site plan review process back and forth until we get to a particular stage of approval. If there's something that does trigger a variance, then that will be presented to the developer and the applicant at that time. And so that's just the normal process of going back and forth to do the site plan review process. And that's pretty sure there's one other question, but I can't recall whatever.
Thank you, John.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't mean to speak, but correct me if I'm wrong.
I know there was
In
one
ter-
other thing too.
In terms of the Cape, the intent was to put parking on Ocean Pines for the Cape.
So
If the pencil would have been spot on sharp and everything would have been known relative to the usage of the Kiowa Island Club members, the project Ocean Pines from the get-go would have had more parking. The Cape wasn't going to change. Would the Cape have changed?
So the other part that in answering Mr. Belt's question about sort of how this is a long history of parcel 13.
Right, absolutely.
A long history that goes back. And so one of the principal, I think, fundamental development findings from parcel 13 was when the connection between Duneside and Southern Pines occurred, or was in the process of being occurred. And there's a whole number of back and forth. The Planning Commission reviewed that. There was community input. There was studies done of would there be entrances from Beachwalker to Cape Point. At that time, the input was, or the understanding was that, to your point, Mr. Mayor, the parking for the beach club would have been on Ocean Pines site based on the agreements and the understanding that the residential component would be operated separately from the beach club itself. And so that parcel being planned in as I mentioned earlier, in more of a comprehensive state, that was the understanding of the time of how that project or parcel would be developed, where parking would be on the Ocean Pines Lot 1 site.
John, thank you. Any other comment? Michael?
Yes. John, first of all, thank you for being here, giving all these explanations, and having the courage to acknowledge that a mistake was made. I think goes a long way, at least with me. So just to make sure I understand it correctly, so your understanding at the time of the approval for the Cape was that first it sounded like it was not 100% clear to you the usage of the Kiowa or the Cape Club and the traffic that would be created. That was one thing that I've heard. The other thing I've heard was that you assumed that the parking would be covered on Ocean Pines for the club facility. Which of the two?
So two things. I mean, traffic in itself isn't necessarily something that is a apples to
No,
apples.
I meant parking, not the driving part, the parking part of
Okay.
traffic.
So the parking, based on the agreement that was, use the word, between the developer, Kiowa Island community, that was presented to as part of the actual plat approvals for those projects with the Planning Commission, that was the understanding that spaces for the club would be on Ocean Pines, yeah, on that Lot 1 site.
Okay, I understand that. And again, things change over time and interpretation and everything. But then why would then the developer for Ocean Pines present us with a site plan that does not include the first site plan that they presented, even the preliminary plat that they presented to the Planning Commission back in 2022, I believe. Why would neither the preliminary plat nor then the site plan that they submitted now, the first one, not the one that they provided, with some parking, why would not any of the first two, the preliminary plat and the first site plan, actually include then the parking?
So the parking was there, it was just the total number of parking spaces is what is being now presented. The difference in
Yeah, but the developer, the requirements for parking for something like the Cape Club is all in the open, right? It's something that everybody can calculate who has the designs, knows how the space of the pool, the space of the deck, the space of the restaurant. So they would have known that the 30 parking spaces that was part of the memorandum of understanding between the developer and Kika would never be sufficient. So why would they then present something that did not obviously, comply with what they were conveying to you when the Cape was up for approval?
If I
would
just
be
add
able
one thing to that, their original site plan that had that 30 spaces actually showed only 16 were designated to the Cape.
Right.
The other 14 were actually still spillover for the Ocean Pines itself.
well,
Well, I think it's a
I don't
good
speak for the
conversation, but
developer.
I'm not sure that that's fair to put John in the position of,
No. It's just to understand,
No, what I would say, I wouldn't be able to represent what the developer's intent behind their submittal. So that was going to be my statement to that.
All right, so change of course of questions. So when I now look at what you call the Cape Point Access Drive and Emergency Beach Access, that is not part of parcel 13 in any configuration, right? That is part of the Captain Sam Spit parcel, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so,
Well, if you look at the adjacency, it would be, but not the formal boundaries of.
correct, which was a little difficult because it was not really well marked on the plans that I saw at least where these property lines go. But my understanding now is that all of this road extension and the parking along that road, I believe 16, 20,
I believe.
20, 19 or 20 parking spaces, that's actually not physically on parcel 13. Is that correct? So the requirement, so the zoning for that portion of parcel 11, what is the?
It's 12A.
12, okay. does not allow parking and, setbacks and all of this. So all of this would create variances.
So what's being presented is an access drive. So a drive would be able to have parking associated with it. That's how it's being presented today, opposed to it being a standalone, just free service.
Yeah, I understand that, but what is presented, the access drive and the parking along that access drive, creates the need for a variance approval, because it's not in compliance with the zoning for that particular portion of parcel 12A.
Well, and I would say not only that, what's been identified by a number of community members is it's not a permitted use, a commercial use isn't a permitted use, that those proposed parking places themselves don't seem to comply with the parking standards or the road code, and it doesn't comply with the various setback requirements, and it encroaches actually on the Beach Walker parcel. It's one thing if it were just emergency access road, but when you're trying to fit all this other stuff into it is where the problems arise.
I've issued comments. I mean, I don't think this forum would be to hash out through all of the nuances there, but I've issued comments already based on my initial review, and so that's kind of where we are.
Let's move on. It's too.
Mayor, if I just, not focused on this, but a kind of a broader comment, maybe that's something we should think about going forward, just like Councilmember Berner suggested, 122128 doesn't specifically address beach parking. Is it your view that as planning director, you can require additional parking beyond the minimum, whether the minimum standards in the ordinance are sufficient to meet obviously foreseeable parking needs? And put aside the Cape Club itself, any facility there, under the ARDA, it was just 1.75 parking spaces per two-bedroom unit. It's two spaces under the town's ordinances. But right now at the Cape Club, there is the minimum number at the Cape. Put aside the club, there's the minimum number of required spaces for residents to be able to park in their parking spaces under the buildings, but there's still no parking for, put aside the Cape Club, no parking for visitors. If a Cape Club of a Cape resident wants to host a big party at that beautiful little facility over the top of the largest building on the corner and invite 2 or 3 dozen people, where are they supposed to park? And the kind of the same issues that have been identified, I think, by community members with regard to Upper Beach Walker, that there's literally not a single on one of the parcels additional parking space for anybody beyond a resident, and only, I think, 8 total for 56 residents on the parcel 9. Do we need to look at a fresh look at our parking standards?
I mentioned that at our fall retreat, that as part of the comprehensive review of our zoning code, which would be the next project, that would be one of the particular ordinances that we look at. So that's already on the slate of things that we would include for us to comprehensively look at 128.
Okay, so I have still 2 questions. I really apologize, Mayor. I'm still not clear on the next procedure for these parking spots along the Cape Point access drive. I understand, and Councilman Belt explained that even in further detail. My understanding is that the current proposal is not consistent with the zoning in that particular area, which then to me means it's a variance need to be approved for that. So how is that process going to be handled? Is this something that falls under your authority, or is this something that needs to be handled by the Board of Zoning Appeals?
So a variance would go for the BZA. That's not a staff level approval. So if a variance is warrant, we would process that through the BZA. Anything else, it going through site plan review, that would be administrative approval.
Okay, but so I understand this now, that you're basically saying the fact that they are putting in there these parking spots that are not compliant with our own ordinances will require them to appeal to the BZA.
That has not been my determination at this time.
I mean, looking at the comment letter, you've posed the comment, off-street parking spaces shall be accessible without backing into or otherwise re-entering a public right-of-way. Head-on parking is prohibited. You've raised the comment, so they need to address those pursuant to your comment. If they don't, then either it's, the site plan is disapproved, or then they would have to apply for a variance, I assume.
So I said that
Yeah.
I've issued comments, and we'll go back and forth until we get to a particular stage of next steps. So next steps could be conditions of approval, it could be approval, it can be saying, hey, variance, that's part of this site plan review process.
And I think that what people, and by the way, the greater level of transparency that's occurred with regard to the last 3 months or so of these issues, once these have all been posted, it's caused a lot of heartburn and angst, but it's extraordinarily helpful. So to identify all the issues in advance, so we don't, run into situations like we did, however well-intended, there were mistakes made in the past. But I do note that it doesn't appear that there's a comment with regard to permitted uses for this parcel, as an example. But I know your process, your review isn't yet complete. But those are the types of things that people, I think, will continue to flag with regard to these.
So the last thing that I'll make is just as the other projects that have been presented on Beach Walker, I've also shared this with our third-party engineer as well. So for those who don't agree with whatever comments have been provided, they have a level of safety net by that third-party engineer review.
Thank you.
So my
One
last
more
question, I'm sorry, Mayor. Help me clarify this. So section 12-128, 3D4 says that all parking needs to be on the same site. Now, I was trying to understand the definition for site within section 12. Help me to, what is a site? Is this the entire parcel 13 is the site, or is it lot 1? What is a site in that particular meaning for you?
For which
So, I mean, again, all required parking facilities shall be located on the same site as the use for which such facilities are required. So what does site mean in this context? The whole parcel 13, Timbers,
that
Cape,
particular project,
or just a particular portion of parcel 13?
so it would be whatever the immediate site is for that particular development.
So just the Cape then? is
So
what you
then
mean.
the Cape would be the site. Okay, thank you.
Thank you
Thank you again, John.
We'll look forward to your presentation in February. If I was a new resident and picked up on the listserv and this meeting and this talk, these conversations that are going on, the one question that I would have, not looking to get my degree in urban planning, is any of this stuff overbuilt? So maybe when you come back in February, you can comment on that, because there has been discussions, maybe, what it should have been, all of those things, and where parking is being considered. But fundamentally, for someone that doesn't have that level of sophistication that they really get into like this, that would be my question. Are those buildings bigger than they were supposed to be? But save that until February, because I think that when you just read this, you walk away saying, oh my God, it's like multiple times bigger than it was supposed to be. These guys really made a mistake. I granted it's all being worked on right now, but I think it's the existing buildings if they're sized the way they're sized appropriately. But anyway, bring that up and
Mayor, respectfully, I think most of the comments that have been raised with regard to that have noted that it's not the size of the buildings relative to what was actually permitted under the ARDA. They are as they were permitted under the ARDA. That's much greater than they would have been under the town zoning ordinances. The issue is just like has arisen with regard to now Ocean Pines, that they were at the maximum lot coverage with all those buildings if they had put the required number of parking spaces, 80-some parking spaces, on the Cape site as was appeared to be required, then they would not have been able to build
As many.
as many buildings.
But that's where I get confused too, though, Brad, when it says that we knew, or they knew, or whoever they are, knew that all the parking wasn't going to be on the Cape side, it was going to be on anyway. Citizen comments. Yes, sir.
Oh, I didn't want to. Alex Hernandez, 418 Snowy Creek. Mr. Mayor, as a property owner, full-time resident, I'm very sorry to hear about your resignation.
Thank you.
You know, I personally want to thank you for your service. I know that I'm sure that this was not an easy decision for you. I know there are difficult times, but we'll miss you.
Thank you, Alex. Very nice of you to say. Thank you.
Secondly, I need to make some comments about some issues that were raised with reference to KICA. I'm not speaking on behalf of the board of KICA, but I am a member of the board. So with reference to Councilman Berner's comment with reference to calling the security, we all have to understand that KICA security is not a police force. We're there to assist our homeowners in case of an emergency. If anybody calls and there may be a crime in the works or in the process, our protocol requires that we advise the person that you need to call 911. And the main purpose of calling 911 is so that you're immediately detected. They know where you are, exactly where you are. So the response from the sheriff's office, they would know exactly what to do. I can't get into how long it would take or whatever, but that's the protocol of our security department. There was a comment mentioned with reference to an agreement with KICA with reference to the Cape. It's public knowledge that there is a disagreement. So we need to be careful of quoting that there is an agreement with KICA with reference to the parking on Ocean Pines. There is a written document which right now there's disagreements, and it's public knowledge. Everybody has seen the correspondence between the two parties with reference to that MOU. So we need to be careful to quote that there's an agreement. There is a written MOU, but there is disagreement on how it's being interpreted. The real reason I wanted to get up here was, as you know, I've been following the tree preservation ordinance for a long time, almost 2 years now, where I've been insisting that this is something that the town of Kiawah requires. I was pleased to see that at the November Planning Commission meeting that this was on the agenda, and I attended. And I came up and commented to the Planning Commission that I congratulated them and thanked them for finally we were going to see this come through and come to the council for its approval. But as the discussion went on during the hearing, I became concerned with a couple of issues in the tree protection ordinance. Number one is that I can understand that this is a phase-through process. And if you today enacted this ordinance, it would not apply to any single-family home, any single-family development. And the thinking behind that is that you want to make this into a gradual process. You want other input from other parties with reference to. And you can say, you can argue against it or you can argue for it. You know, I would be comfortable as long as there's a time horizon that this is not going to happen 5 years from now. But my big concern is that this ordinance, if you enacted it today, it would not apply to anyone in the permit process. Now, my main concern always from 2 years ago was that what's going to happen to the beach walker parcels with reference to tree protection. And if you enacted this ordinance today, they would not have to comply with it. So I would ask that you think about that. You know, I understand, you know, the planning director, you know, told me that, look, they're in the process of permitting. So I can't ask them to do something that hasn't been enacted or is going to be enacted in the future. But I do believe that you need to think about that and see how we're assured that the trees on the Beach Walker parcels are protected, and that we don't have an incident like we had at the Cape where live oaks were cut and we were advised of them being cut after the fact. And then all kinds of reasons why they should have, why they were cut. You need to get in front of this train and be sure that our trees are protected on that Beach Walker parcel. The second thing, there was a change in the Planning Commission process that I think you need to look at it as well, is that it's in reference to how to qualify, or how does a tree qualify as being dead or can be cut. And in the initial submission in the ordinance, it requires a double process. It required an approval or written confirmation from an arborist, and then which something I didn't know, that there's different levels or titles in the arborist level, in the arborist qualifications. And one of them is called Tree Risk Assessment Qualified Arborist, which means it makes it, somebody would really have to, at a higher level say, yes, this tree should be cut. Now, for whatever reasons, in the discussion in the Planning Commission, it was decided to not require that second level of request for a tree to be cut. I would ask that you reconsider that, and not only just a, arborist number one, but also one that is higher qualified than an arborist one, okay? And then my last point with reference to the ordinance is it does not cover pruning whatsoever. Does not cover pruning. My understanding is this may come at a later stage. It's not at all documented, so I would ask again, let's put a time horizon on when are we gonna make sure that our trees are protected, not only in the preliminary building of a lot or a commercial parcel, but also the pruning that goes on every year. We all do, that our trees are protected at that time as well, too. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Perry Molinoff, 10 Blue Heron Pond Road. I also represent Preserve Kiowa. I have two questions or comments. The first has to do with the engineer's report on the Beachwalker development. I was pleased to see that it included a site visit. It was my understanding that the original scope of work did not permit a site visit, so that's, I think, is an improvement, important improvement. I wonder, when will that report be available to the community? It would be nice to have not only the report, but also the specific charge that was given to the engineer. The west end is complete. Is there a reason why we couldn't get that? The first question. And the second?
Heard the answer just minutes earlier.
The report as to Upper Beachwalkers on the site.
It's on this. Good, thank you. The second is a question for Councilman Heidenfelder. As many of us, and I think you, are very much committed to maintaining Sam Spit in its natural and pristine condition. You raised something that I hadn't heard before, with the idea of rezoning it for recreation only. And I'm wondering
Or, as Mr. Belt said, for conservation.
For conservation. And I'm wondering, is that possibility brought on by the expiration of the ARDA, or is that something that could be done just as part of standard procedures?
Well, the ARDA is expired, so that's history.
But is that what allows you to consider this rezoning?
Probably as well, but independent from it, because
The town could have rezoned it this last time around. There are always issues with regard to rezoning, particularly what might characterized as a down zoning. But any issue with regard to down zoning is at least addressed, at least in part, by a provision of the ARDA, which is actually referenced in the demand letter, so you can read that. And that's what occasioned, I think, the council members Heidingsfelder's excellent suggestion about taking a look at that going forward.
Yeah. And the process will uncover, how far we can go with this and what legal limitations might exist. But I think it's worth to go down that route, because I think we all want to protect that piece of land. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Larry Wallahan, 406 Snow Egret. I'd like to endorse Alex's comments about the mayor. I think he's been balanced and considerate over the last few years, and I think we will miss him. We haven't always seen eye to eye, but we will miss you. The question on the Cape, there seems to be an additional floor being constructed at the very west end. I'd like to ask, is that permitted? Do you know to which I'm referring? There's a balcony type construction on the top roof. Anyone help me? I mean, it's covered. There's a canopy there, and I believe it is an additional floor. I don't know how you define floor, but I believe there's an elevator up to that floor, and therefore, it's sorry?
A violation?
I don't know. I'm just asking the question, is it permitted? That's all.
I don't know, it very well could just be a roof deck where the
Well, what's a
elevator
roof
goes
deck?
up.
So are you talking about the very,
Covered roof deck where you can
Okay,
walk on.
talking about the
Plan here.
southwest building of the property?
It's on the extreme west of the
Yes,
property.
that was part of the site plan.
Was it? But that's an additional floor.
No, that's
No, that's not a
that's an
floor.
entertainment
It's not
deck,
a
I think
floor.
it is. No, there's no living,
Is there an elevator up to it?
Yeah, but that doesn't make it a floor.
no, there shouldn't. There
I'm sorry
shouldn't.
to you.
No, there shouldn't be an elevator because, the elevator height is also defined by
But
our
it's not a
zoning.
floor?
Not for living, it's
No, it's not livable.
not.
No, I
living
understand it may
space.
not be livable, but isn't it another floor? I mean,
Just the
does
roof.
it accommodate people
Well,
temporarily?
I haven't seen it, so I really shouldn't say, but in my experience in other projects, it's just roof access areas, and it's accessed via a roof, where it could be a patio area, for example.
Does it have restrooms?
And what I can suggest is
I
that the
have to
comment should
look.
be, after the meeting, I think John Taylor can explain that to you in
Sure,
terms of
please.
it. Yeah,
Again, it
instead of
just
trying to
seems-
debate
It
it
just
now.
seems sort of symptomatic of what
Yeah.
goes on in the Cape.
Yeah, if you could, we can look
Sorry.
at it with the building department and planning department and answer that for you.
Okay, and then I have further questions or comments later on. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? Mrs. McKay, I think you're up.
Okay. Hello, my name is Frida McKay. I'm a full-time resident of the island, and I am here to talk today about geoengineering. So geoengineering is the blanket term for climate and weather modification. It includes things such as cloud seeding, cloud thinning, carbon capture, and solar radiation management. And today I'm going to focus on solar radiation management in the form of stratospheric aerosol injection. So stratospheric aerosol injection is the process of aircrafts flying up to the stratosphere and upper troposphere and dumping or injecting aerosols. They do this in order to slow global warming and mitigate climate change. The idea is that the aerosols will reflect the sun's radiation and sunlight back into space and prevent it from hitting the Earth's surface. So what's in these aerosols? Well, environmental sulfates, black carbon, metallic aluminum, aluminum oxide aerosols, barium titanate, and sulfur dioxide. Now, it's not limited to that list. In 2016, a PubMed article stated that adverse public health impacts are to be expected even at the research and development phase. Little is known about the toxicity of these aerosols. There's no consensus regarding acceptable levels of exposure to these aerosols, and there's little to no infrastructure in place to evaluate the impacts of SAI aerosols on public health. In 2009, congressional hearings took place in front of the Science and Technology Committee. Multiple experts, including Alan Robach, testified that even experimenting and researching SAI could lead to ozone depletion, permanently gray skies, environmental impacts such as crop failure and vegetation loss, commercial control, human error, human health impacts, soil, air, and water contamination, acid rain, and changes in precipitation patterns. In 2021, a scientific journal titled Reflecting the Sun's Rays was published, and it echoed all of these same risks still existed. Nothing was put in place to minimize or negate these risks, but in conclusion, they felt that the risks of climate change and global warming warranted the moving forward with research and development. So that brings us to this summer. The current administration published this document, a congressionally mandated research plan and initial research governance framework related to solar radiation modification. The link is at the bottom there. It's an over 300-page document that I encourage you to read in your free time. When you read through it, I would encourage you to find the section where it refers to NOAA's solar radiation budget, and it'll bring you to NOAA's Chemical Science Laboratory. And then it'll bring you to NOAA's Project SABRE. And Project SABRE goes into exactly what I described as what stratospheric aerosol injections are, what they're used for. It also lays out the different aircrafts that have been and will be purchased from Lockheed Martin. It lays out the different setups for aerosol injection, and this project, Project SABRE, has been going on since 2022. So the next couple slides I'm going to show you are my personal images. I've been documenting the sky since December of 2022. These particular pictures were taken this November at 6:45 a.m. You can see the blue skies and multiple lines in the sky. A few hours later, 5 hours later, you can see that those lines spread out and turned into a thick white haze that covered or blocked the sun. These are examples of the beach club. You can see those cloud formations are not normal. The middle picture is downtown Charleston. You can see that chemical, colorful sheen in that plume or cloud, and it's covering the sun. And then again in Kiowa, more examples of the lines that the aircraft leave. Here are more examples from 2023. You can see the lines in the sky spreading out and covering the sun. More examples, fresh fields. This last picture is over JZI, and you can see that these aerosol injections are way up high in the upper troposphere and stratosphere. And I showed you this last picture for a reason, because I wanted to talk about condensation. I was told for the longest time that these are just condensation trails. And I hoped that they were, but the more research I did, it became very obvious to me that condensation does not last for very long, usually a few seconds, at most a few minutes on very rare occasions when it's humid. The last picture I showed you was the stratosphere and upper troposphere, which has no humidity, no moisture, or very little. Condensation trails do not spread out into a thick white haze. They disappear very quickly. They don't favor the sun's position. And all the pictures I chose were of different, the days were different relative humidity, and I have that information if anyone's interested. My concerns, well, first and foremost, are for my family's health. What does breathing in these chemicals and heavy metals do to our health? I'm, of course, concerned about the health of my fellow community members. I certainly do not want Kiowa to be known for gray skies. I'm concerned about the vegetation health on the island and all around the Low Country. I know that it's winter now, but I started taking note this summer of the plants and trees on the island and their health. My husband and I are big supporters of the Johns Island farmers, and forget about crop failure. I wonder what soil, air, and water contamination does to the crops that we are consuming. Golf course conditions, not saying that the golf course conditions are poor, they're beautiful here, but if we continuously block out the sun's light from hitting the plants, what will that do to golf course conditions? And last but not least, if we have an island of dying plants and sick community members and gray skies and dying golf courses, what will that do to our property values? So towns who have taken action on banning SAI and solar radiation management and other forms of geoengineering are Fairfax, California. In 2012, they became the first chemical trail-free zone. The town council got a lot of pushback and were mocked, and they said, well, you know what, if they are not spraying the skies, that's fantastic. But if they plan to, or if they are, we'd rather be safe than sorry. So they put in a town ordinance. Rhode Island proposed House Bill 5866 in 2023. It did not pass, but it was to ban all forms of geoengineering over the state of Rhode Island. And then just January 3rd of this year, New Hampshire introduced House Bill 1700, prohibiting the intentional release of polluting emissions, including cloud seeding, weather modification, excessive electromagnetic radio frequency, and microwave radiation. So we'll see if that passes. What would I like the town to do about this? Well, I would like you to inform and educate residents that it's happening. Ideally, I'd love for the town to put some sort of ordinance in place banning SAI, marine cloud whitening, other forms of geoengineering. If you do take those steps, I'd like you to include the town and be transparent. Possibly form a committee to monitor the progress and work with other towns and cities in the area. And last but not least, let me know how I can be of assistance to the council moving forward. So thank you for your time. That's the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, I think I'm under my 15 minutes.
Did fine. Thank you very much. Any questions, comments from the council members?
Okay.
Thank you. Is this in the broadest purview of the environmental committee or something like that?
We had talked with her about, Councilmember Hanfelder and I had met with her along with Jim Jordan, and we had suggested that this go through the environmental committee. And I believe, didn't you do a presentation to the environmental committee already? I don't recall.
I did not. I had a Zoom meeting with Michael and yourself, and I met with you. I've had lots of texts between Jim and I, but this kind of seemed like the best way. I know Michael had suggested just putting it out in IKEA, but I felt like it was more important than that.
Oh, we have an environmental committee. I think it would be worthwhile talking with the folks in that committee.
We'll suggest that, yeah, again, I know she's been working with Jim, and I know Jim, I thought he brought this to the environmental committee, but I can work with you on that, but I thought it's already been through that or talked about at the environmental committee.
He asked if they tested for the certain heavy metals, and they don't. So I think that's kind of as far as it went.
Okay, why don't we plan on that, or you work that out?
Okay.
So you'll be in touch with me, Stephanie?
Yes, yes, I'll be in touch.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Thank you very, very much. Old business, none, new business. To consider approval of ordinance 2024-01. This is the tree preservation and landscaping standards. Could I have a motion to go into public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Okay, we're in public hearing. John, do you want to give a few comments to kick it off, and then we'll turn it over to the community?
Yeah, I'm sorry, you should vote because John should did the presentation before you went into public hearing, but you can go ahead.
Didn't we just do that?
No, we
No.
didn't vote, but he wants to make a presentation
Yeah.
beforehand anyway.
Right. Yeah, we can do that, so you're not officially in public hearing. The mayor put you guys
Yeah,
in
yeah,
there, but
no,
you
no,
didn't
no,
vote.
no.
So you're not in public hearing right now.
We have a motion pending, but not voted
Right,
on it.
right.
Okay.
So I'll try to be brief here. Really, this process began early last 2023, and Planning Commission in December made a recommendation to come forth to council and approval of a landscape and tree preservation ordinance. This has really been some time to get through, and we've been thankful for all of the input that has gotten this recommendation in front of council. I wanted to be clear that the town historically has previously actually had a landscaping ordinance that was essentially removed in an effort that it was duplicative. And so I did share that with the Planning Commission in looking at the case history for this particular endeavor. But we are in our authority to be able to have landscaping and tree preservation standards within the town, even though there's a idea or conception there that, as you all know, the Kiawah Island Architectural Review Board has principally been the steward of tree removal for Kiawah. So in our current code today, there are a few sections that address minimally landscape or tree preservation, and very minimally in these three sections. However, we know the benefit that yields for trees and landscaping for Kiawah, being habitat, shade, buffering, et cetera. And so these are all of the things that the commission took into consideration in preparing a ordinance for recommendation. The other component to this is looking how this would be applied across the island. And so whether it be commercial property, single-family residential, or rights-of-way, those things were initially considered in the grand scheme of things, and it was ultimately funneled down to what you see before the recommendation. I'll hit the highlights of what that process entailed. In addition to those three things mentioned as far as actually where this ordinance would apply, the Planning Commission began with a subcommittee, and that subcommittee looked at these essential components in framing this particular ordinance, designing with nature and its existing standards and guidelines. That was a true blueprint in this process. Our Kiawah Grow Native initiative of advocating for native plants on Kiawah. We know the health and benefit that is associated with native plants here. Kiawah Next, the applicability to neighborhood. Different neighborhoods may require different needs based on the unique elements and circumstances within those neighborhoods. And then additionally, finally, looking at the capacity to look at landscaping. And ultimately what the commission decided to do was break this into two phases. So this first phase really only primarily focuses on tree preservation and not really landscape standards. That would be phase 2 of this endeavor. So what's before you today is really the tree preservation standards, with the idea at a later date, a recommendation of more landscaping standards will be studied and then provided back to council. And this was with the intent that to advance the timeline. I know Mr. Fernandez has mentioned of getting this on the record. So one highlight I do want to mention, I mentioned all of the factors. There were some critical key players in this particular process. Ms. Jennifer Hayes, who's Key Island Architecture Review Board's landscape coordinator, as well as the design community input. Those individuals, once we got to a state of putting together actual language, those individuals provided the commission with a wealth of input and feedback. And we went through a series of public meetings. The subcommittee of the Planning Commission, and additionally, held workshops where we actually tested the ordinance. So Jen Hayes provided examples of how this particular ordinance would apply if it were effective today. And that was a learning experience for members of the commission to see, well, we may not want to go down this route because that may create some unintended consequences. We looked at the permitting process overall, on the resources that it would take to make sure that the ordinance was effective, as well as the development timeline. There was a great deal of comments from the design community as that there's a good process in place, but we don't want to necessarily impact the timing for permit of review. And so I've highlighted here just a few of the examples of public meetings that we held in the month of November. Our Planning Commission meeting was in December. And between these meetings were a number of smaller work sessions. So these aren't all of the engagement opportunities. I won't go through the ordinance in its entirety, but I do want to hit the purpose, which was really to look at tree preservation for Kiowa and ensuring that the town now has a stake in ensuring how tree preservation is administered. So the key factors of this proposed ordinance, number one, it does introduce the ability for the town itself to administer tree mitigation standards or tree preservation standards. This was a big discussion point of the applicability, and where it ended up landing is that today, if it enacted, that it would only apply to non-single family residential developments. And that was with the intent that at appropriate time, the council, the community would identify when would we bring on single family as a phase in overall the entirety of residential developments.
Yeah, John, if I could just have you press pause right there, because it's going to come up otherwise. I understand holding off for now and moving later on to single family residential, but why only non-single family residential as opposed to commercial projects, mixed use, resort, et cetera? Why the focus only on residential?
So this essentially what we're saying is commercial would be administered through this particular ordinance. The focus on non-single family residential or single family residential, rather, is that
I fine on the second, but we need to clarify because this just says residential, doesn't say commercial.
so everything outside of non-single family would be applicable is what we're saying.
Might need to adjust the wording.
That the commission went through that debate, and this was the language that was recommended. So that of it being exclusively in the language itself that shows. I think it's a word choice. I mean, it could be administered around. In my opinion, I think it's a word choice of it could be.
Okay, so that's fine. Applicable to anything that is not a single-family residential development.
Right. This particular ordinance, it aims to be less restrictive than the guidelines outlined in the Key Island Architecture Review Board, Design It with Nature, those guidelines. And it does provide some discretion in there, and that's really for a couple reasons. Number one, the impacting of time for the permitting process. Two, flexible design, and the design teams really, we met with, well, not met with, but we noticed over 270, whether architects, landscape architects, builders, contractors, throughout this process. And the thing that we kept receiving is the process works today. So they were actually kind of concerned of us, that why is the town actually creating a new standard that would delay their permitting process with the homeowner to be able to receive the expectations that to deliver their projects. This does exempt normal tree pruning. It doesn't mean that there's no language in here that covers tree pruning, because there is, but this would just, for regular maintenance and pruning, this would be exempt from this particular ordinance. And the additional part is that it adds another layer of review mechanism through a tree preservation board. So there's another layer of scrutiny for certain standards of relief if needed.
John, that was a point that, so, if you could go back just one. So there's a question, and there's a challenge relative to this ordinance, and then we're going to adopt the Tree Preservation Board. But by its writing, it's less restrictive than the ARB. So is there daylight between something that is questionable vis-à-vis this, that is acceptable by the ARB, because this is less restrictive? And then there is an ARB board. How?
So the thinking there is that the Tree Preservation Board would not be meeting as necessary as or often as the ARB's board itself. This would be if an application came before for review and they didn't necessarily meet the required mitigation standards, so they didn't meet the particular standards in there.
For which? For our
For this
ordinance
particular- for
or the
this-
ARB guidelines?
For our ordinance, not the ARB. This
Ordinance,
would be
okay.
independent of ARB.
Okay.
So for our ordinance, if it did not meet those particular standards, a traditional method would be going before the BZA. We got comments from that the Tree Preservation Board would be able to craft a better representation of experts who are familiar with the design, tree preservation, that particular board or makeup would be able to better deliver a more quality product opposed to this going before
No, I'm sorry, I'm not explaining myself. I understand what it would do, but I'm just saying, if it's less restrictive than the ARB, then maybe the ARB would have accepted it. So what's a homeowner to do if they're kind of stuck in between a less restrictive that has a board? I wonder if the Tree Preservation Board denies it? Or-
If I would sort of give a example of applicability, we would expect that they get through the town's ordinance prior to them getting a hang up at the ARB level, because we are. So if there's something
I'm saying that they aren't getting a hang up at the ARB level, that the ARB would have accepted it. I'm just trying, in my head, trying to figure out.
How do we know who governs? I mean, there's two different entities.
Yeah, who adjudicates this? It says,
Well, I think you hit on a critical issue that I'm not sure whether we're kind of getting into the details now, but this whole notion of less restrictive becomes a little bit problematic because the ARB apparently signed off on the clear cutting of the Cape, cutting down all perimeter trees outside of the building envelope. The ARB apparently signed off on the lay-down construction area for Lot 1. I want a town ordinance that is more restrictive than that would, just because the ARB says fine with us, doesn't mean that it's necessarily fine with the town. So I'm a little concerned about this whole concept of less restrictive than the ARB.
Yeah, and to connect here, I was, I don't know, pulled into the wrong direction reading that so often in all of these 50 pages that we had to go through, that intentionally, the objective was, less restrictive than the ARB, and I'm missing the logic.
Right.
Why?
So I'll comment in a couple ways. There's multiple reasons for that. So for the permitting process, number one, if overall timeline, if we would have had two separate tracks of approval processes, that would significantly delay the timeline for approval for projects. That was pushback that we got back from the community on the overall delay of timeline. So hypothetically, if
The
our
community or the contractors?
the design community, I mean,
Okay,
what I say,
the contractors.
builders, yeah. So in my mind, they are representing a wide base of not just themselves, but they're also representing the homeowner.
But we're actually, that's part of the issue. We're not talking about homeowners. We're not talking about single-family residential for any of this.
Property owners.
Okay.
Property owners. And in addition to that, most of their comments represented single-family homeowners anyway.
And I noticed that, but that's not what this ordinance is now addressing.
So if I get to, I think where this is heading, Amit, the number one issue when you reference the Cape, right? This would apply to the Cape project. So they would need to meet our mitigation requirements in addition to what would be outlined in.
But I'm still confused. If ours is less restrictive, I'm just really confused. Why are we going through all this if we're less restrictive?
Because the threshold of being more restrictive, that's the typical pattern of review scrutiny. So the governing body and then a more of a private restrictive covenants where the ARB would fall typically would go to a level that is more scrutinized. So they're looking at a lot more detail than what the town level would be.
Okay, so who wins? Wins is not a good word, but which one governs? Which one governs at the end of the day?
They both are, they're separate, so they're separate documents.
John, but you just hit on one issue. We're going to start to get down a little bit in the weeds, because I know there's a lot of good work and a lot of hard work that's gone into this. But you, for example, when you referenced the Cape, you talked about mitigation. The issue is who is saying, we want somebody to be able to say, and it needs to be the town, I'm sorry, it's not a matter of mitigation. There are certain trees you can't cut down.
That's it. I shouldn't have just led with mitigation,
Okay.
but in this particular ordinance, there are standards revolving of which trees can and cannot be removed. So mitigation is an additional stage,
There were a
but
bunch of questions around that. We'll get into those details, but
But
okay.
that was part of my confusion, okay? So starting out reading all of this, I got, multiple, reminders about less restrictive, and then the more I was reading forward, okay, I felt at least that there's actually more restrictive, especially when it comes which trees cannot be cut down, what are the mitigation factors or measures. I did not get the impression, and by the way, the size of the trees, right? My understanding of ARB looks at trees only over 16 HD something by diameter on chest height, right? You go down to 8. So what I was then really more and more getting confused, you're stating it as an objective, but then when I look at the fine print, I felt you go far beyond, which is good, don't get me wrong, but far beyond that. So that's where I'm struggling.
Well, this is the public hearing.
Not yet.
Well, I know it's not yet, but that's why there are.
Yeah, maybe we should
That's-
postpone
that was what I
our,
just whispered to Mr.
Yeah, let's put
Wilson
the
that.
clutch in just a second
Yeah.
and hold those thoughts. Now, did we had a motion?
we had a motion,
Okay.
but are you done with your presentation?
Probably not.
I wasn't, but I mean.
But he is now.
Yeah,
He is now.
okay, could I have a motion to go into public?
Anything else that you think in your presentation it's critical to raise?
I think just, what I was going to highlight were the actual things that came out of the recommendation, in addition to the actual ordinance itself, because I think that they're coupled. Number one, go to that civic slide. So as far as implementation, which was kind of already highlighted as a phasing timeline, so the Planning Commission has recommended that council also sort of consider if and when, I know the process with the transition of the current ARB, and that has been something that the Planning Commission has been independent of and intentionally. But at some point, they felt it necessary for the town to at least think about when might single family or this applies to the entire island. The other component to that is, in addition to us creating the preservation board, the next step would be developing the formal process for that, putting that into ordinance. You have language of what a tree preservation board would look like, but rules of procedures, et cetera, will come next. And then the other thing that was mentioned is was ensuring that this could be effectively administered So Planning Commission did make comments relative to staff and resources that's tied to the enforcement of this particular ordinance. And you've been already kind of preferenced earlier the Ways and Means Committee on that record. So those are the only things that I would add.
Okay. Now to have a vote, to go into public, to have a public hearing.
So, yeah.
Just a vote, all in favor?
Aye.
We're now into a public hearing. Please, come forward. Yes, sir. Oh, man.
I didn't disagree that much with you, John. Alex Fernandez, 418 Snow Egret. Let me correct myself where I want to be clear when I said about pruning, okay? Since it doesn't cover single-family homes, you got to be clear, does it cover single-family home, doesn't cover single-family home pruning? Does it not cover single-family pruning development? I think that has to be cleared. I mean, that's my, okay? Not that in the ordinance, there's a chapter on pruning, but you need to be clear when that pruning portion goes in effect, because it does not go in effect for single-family homes. I want to, in a way, really repeat basically what Mr. Belt said with reference to more that the ARB is harsher or what. Well, the ARB, the largest issue with the ARB is in many occasions they're arbitrary. They really don't have a written law, ordinance like you will, okay, that they need to follow. Okay, so there's a lot of arbitrary, and that's where the arbitrary came in with reference to cutting those live oaks. Somebody said, yeah, they won't make it, so cut them, and it was done. With this ordinance, it would have to go through a process. And that's what I said, hey, before they're cut, you need to have a more expert type of person look at that possible cut, okay? So those are my 2 comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Could I have a motion to come out of public hearing?
So moved.
Second. I just do have one comment that I would want to make, Mr. Mayor. So on slide 17, the good thing is that the tree removal or the tree plan, if you will, is going to be part of the site plan application process and review and approval process, which is an excellent step. So that's separate and apart from the ARB.
Okay. So could I have a motion to approve as a first reading ordinance 2024-01?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion.
I have a couple of typos or recommendations. On page 3 of the draft, item number 2 says, "The tree to be removed has been approved by the Tree Preservation Board." I would like to say has been approved for removal by the Tree Preservation Board. That's number 2. Same page, item number 4 says trees that are determined to be causing structural damage. I would add or will cause structural damage.
You getting all this stuff? Yeah. John, I'm afraid even to say this because of the amount of work. This is just a remarkable book of work. I still don't understand more restrictive, less restrictive, 2 boards, how things are adjudicated or mediated, what it does to a property owner. I guess
So-
it just hasn't gotten into my...
I can walk through, maybe kind of walking through the actual ordinance itself a little bit, and I think maybe that will help with some of that. I think regarding the intent of providing, let me not say intent, but the comment of whether restrictive or less restrictive, I want to spend some time there. The ordinance itself, and I think Mr. Fernandez kind of highlighted this, the ordinance itself now is sort of a black and white document opposed to being subjective in some cases. And that was where the flexibility was built in with the design teams who met with the Architectural Review Board in a review of what trees could be removed, what trees could not be removed. What this does provide is a sort of a certainty, these are the standards in place. And so they would have to meet these particular standards. So in that one example, it could be interpreted that we are more restrictive opposed to being less restrictive.
Would the ARB embrace these, would the ARB embrace our ordinance?
I would say yes, and that's only because this ordinance was worked with hand in hand. Maybe not the entirety.
Does the ARB have to embrace our ordinance?
They do not.
Are you asking if the ARB has to enforce our ordinance? Are you asking if they have to enforce our ordinance?
Well, the ARB approves things. They
Right.
approve this. We're now going to have an ordinance.
Correct. It's almost similar to our zoning ordinance. So if there's things that go before ARB from a building standpoint, the ARB is going to recognize that, oh, you need to get a variance from the BZA. They're going to tell the applicant to go to the BZA to get the variance. And then if the variance is approved, then the ARB may be able to continue the process. So it's very similar to working, I would think, similar to like a tree preservation board or having to go before staff. So it's still going to have that same, and John, I'm looking at you, there's still going to be that very similar relationship as currently is with like the BZA and how the ARB operates with regards to when they believe a variance or approval by the town is required. Is that correct?
Correct. So I think one of the things to insert is on page 4 of the document, where it begins, section 3, tree surveys, tree preservation plans, and landscape plans. As staff, that's one of the more critical components to the ordinance, is that we now have language that either, that does, let me not say either, that would qualify when a applicant needs to submit one or two or all of these things. So today we have nothing in our code that would require a landscape plan or a tree preservation plan. So in associated through our site plan review process, that applicant is now required to provide us with a plan that shows these are the trees that will be removed, and if they can be removed, then these are how they will be mitigated.
See, but this is already a great example where I'm struggling with, right? Because we put these requirements into place that don't exist today. So why would that be less restrictive than the ARB? This is more restrictive, but aside from all of this, I don't even understand why being less restrictive than the ARB can even be and should be an objective. We know that it doesn't work. We know that it is not properly documented. We know that they don't bring really experts to the scene, right? Everything you're describing in here, which I very much agree with some, fine-tuning that we can discuss. I think it's a great piece of work, but a lot of things from the diameter of a tree to these plans that need to be submitted, etc., I view, rightfully so, as being actually stricter and far better defined and more transparent and reliable than what we've seen with the ARB.
I don't
in these
disagree with
cases.
you there. I think that was the whole comment about intent of being less restrictive is to not encumber the development process, not the actual ordinance itself, but not to encumber the timeline of.
But even if it encumbers the fact that we are requiring potentially a tree survey, a tree preservation plan, and a landscape plan, landscape plan is probably what the ARB also requires, but the first two will, have an impact on timing, and rightfully so, because we want to protect the trees that are left on this island.
So John.
Or there's another element, right?
And
When you go to page 10.
I think we are getting a little bit wrapped up in semantics, and maybe we
Right.
should remove every reference
things
to
as
less
less-
restrictive.
Please,
I would
do that.
That was
clearly,
an
because
intent
this is
to
not the
summarize.
objective.
It's
The
not.
objective was to protect our trees, to bring clear procedures to those that are intending to cut for whatever right or wrong purposes, right? To be clear in our definition, not arbitrary, right? But clear in what we want to achieve and what everybody has to work by. And this has, to me, nothing to do with the ARB.
I agree completely. Focus on what it is that we want to achieve as a municipality. If the ARB chooses to be, impose a more
Or less.
burdensome or rigorous or restrictive process or standards on private homeowners under the covenants, that's its prerogative. But what it cannot do is what lessen or weaken any standards that we establish. If we say, for example, you
That's my
can't,
point.
you can't take, if we just said to the complete extreme, that you can't remove any tree greater than 8 inches or 16 inches caliper without going through this really extensive process, making findings and all of that, then that is the law. The ARB can't say, well, we allow it. I'm sorry, you can't. Yeah.
So
And I
on
think
page
that's achieved, if I
9,
will, I think that's achieved if it's part of the site plan review and approval process. So they have to do everything that's in this ordinance in order to get site plan approval. So I think what all you guys are discussing, and I think is accurate and is important, it's taking care of it's a step in the site plan review process. And we need to make that more crystal clear in the ordinance, because I've been flipping through pages. Your PowerPoint slide shows that it is part of the review process. It's not coming across in my quick flipping of the pages just now that it is. So we need to emphasize that.
But then the challenge becomes in the implementation of some of the, once we get into the ordinance, at least as I read it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, there are too many instances where it says removal prohibited unless there's a plan to remove them, and then there's mitigation. And within the discretion of the planning director, my own personal view is there should be some instances where no, mitigation isn't the solution. It's non-removal you've got to work around, the protection of grand trees, as an example. Or there needs to be an
Warren has a question.
extraordinarily high
He's been
bar. for that.
begging.
I'm sorry to interrupt that question. It would help me understand this. I'm gonna build something. I want to get a building permit from the town. I've got to go through the process to get that building permit under this ordinance. You're setting the standards for how trees have to be treated. I'm the one that have to go to the ARB for trees.
Well,
If they're going to give me something less, you're going to take, why waste the step?
because the ARB and the partners would say that pursuant to the general covenants, that you are still obligated to comply with their requirements to seek approval. I'm just saying that's what their general covenants apply.
Like the extra step they're trying to avoid. It also seems like that you're saying no matter what the ARB says about trees, if you have a higher standard, we have to follow that. You're controlling trees.
Yeah,
So that's the, so this extra
Exactly.
step doesn't make any sense.
correct. And that's what we are getting to.
But Roger, yeah, it is, and it obviously has more implications for you, not single-family homeowners, because as where we are with this is proposed right now, it wouldn't apply to single-family residential projects. So only the ARB standards would be applicable to single-family projects.
for
at
now,
least right now,
yes.
For now.
So then, Ross, if you go to Exhibit B of your document, it's probably 14 pages after the ordinance draft, no, right after the ordinance
I
draft.
see Exhibit B, yeah.
Exhibit B is right after the ordinance draft. You will see on the second page, because this is the ordinance, section 12-162, which is site plan review, that there is actually the requirement, and the tree survey, the tree preservation plan, and the landscape plan
Perfect.
are
Okay.
basically the essence of this entire ordinance. Everything of the tree ordinance flies into these three plans.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah?
Thank you.
And that's part. And then also when you go further, to section 12-165 on the next page, exhibit C, that also tree removal is part of the process there as well. So what the Planning Commission has done is drafting a tree ordinance, that's the exhibit A, and then looked at all our ordinances where they need to be adjusted, so that they match up. And that's the really comprehensive, activity
see.
that they perform.
I was looking at the ordinance.
So,
Great.
with view of the second reading, John, I personally would recommend to get rid of any ARB reference, to be honest.
So I want to be clear that I might have misled to say that the entire ordinance is less restrictive than the ARB.
Because it's not, I know. But
So
that's why I'm
that
saying
was-
get
that-
rid of
that-
the ARB reference.
So that was just in my presentation, not in
Yeah.
the code itself. Yeah.
So that is one recommendation that I would have. Second recommendation I would have for between now and the second reading is, at least I have ongoing discussions with Joe Wilson about the legality of designing with nature. And again, in here, it's all over the place. So I would encourage you to please find common ground on that one. And then, third is, please provide us next time with a rough proposal for the timing when you want to bring forward the other one or two elements for this entire, area, means single-family homes, right? And then regular maintenance activities. I think Alex called it pruning. Not here anymore. So, regular maintenance activities, if they also need to be in this ordinance. And then fourth now, is that I like the idea with this tree preservation committee, something. I think that's a good idea. Otherwise, we will overload the BZA, I guess. But I'm still struggling with what actually their work is going to be, because when I look at pages 2 and 3 and 4 of the draft ordinance, a lot of the authority is actually given to the planning director,
And I'm going to
right?
get to some
And
specific comments.
I have trouble to find. So, and I'm not saying that this is necessarily wrong, but the way I've read that several times is that the planning director makes final decisions. So what is actually ending up with this tree ordinance committee thing? So that's one thing. But then there are topics that are of real relevance, I believe, to the community. For example, when it comes to cutting down big trees, when it comes down to using neighboring properties for staging, etc. Those would have been topics that I would have really liked to see with this, and I'm sorry that I'm mixing up the name, but this tree ordinance committee or tree preservation committee, because that's where we have community involvement. Assuming that a good portion of that committee will be volunteers from the community. So I would like to challenge you to go through, especially these pages 2 and 3 again a little bit more in detail and say, okay, what can be done by the planning director, and where should really this committee comes into play. Maybe it has to do with the magnitude of the tree issue, or a certain for example, if a tree preservation plan is required based on your criteria, maybe that's something that really this committee should handle. So I think there need to be a better balance between the authority with the planning director and what really this volunteer committee should do.
I have some more comments if you're done, Michael.
Yes, my last comment, I apologize, Russ, is I also read that in some of the comments that you receive, which you added. Really great, by the way, that you did. The comments from the contractors and the landscaping architects, etc., that you also provided us with. There were one or two commentaries about how and where these landscape architects and the arborists, et cetera, should be licensed and registered. So in your ordinance, you mostly only talk about licensed, registered landscape architects. But shouldn't we require that those are South Carolina licensed and registered landscape architects? And the same with the arborists, right?
So
Both from a
those-
knowledge point of view, but also just because we want, local service
so
providers.
That was discussed during this process. There isn't a South Carolina-specific license for that, and so that's a sort of a national, international level of credential. And so it was actually in here before, and we actually removed it, so.
Oh,
yeah.
okay. And that's the same with registration? I mean, license is one, and registration?
As far as, are you saying a licensed Kiowa business license?
No, I assume that from the beginning, right? I mean, nobody that should work on these things, should avoid our business licenses. But the question is, okay, if it's a license, if there's no South Carolina license, I understand that makes sense. But then the registration as a South Carolina company or branch of a company, isn't that something?
Yeah, I don't know if we could.
Is that?
He's,
For landscaping and arborists, or just in general?
you're talking about being registered through the Secretary of
I mean,
State.
the terms used here are landscape architects and arborists.
We, just from a general standpoint, we have folks who have companies elsewhere who do work. So I wouldn't put something, a provision that says it's dedicated to only a South Carolina
Company.
company. But if they're,
Okay, and
No,
then there
no,
are some other minor topics that I will send you by email. Yes, Russ, sorry.
Page 11, item 9, it says maintenance of trees. This ordinance gives responsibility to the property owner to care for saved and/or planted trees and gives you references of how to do that. But there's no consequence if saved or planted trees still die. So we need to have a consequence, meaning that he has to replant or there's a financial penalty or something.
that's in here. We did consider that. There wasn't an explicit, recommendation on implementing a specific fine for violations. Today, that was all referenced pursuant to what's our current violation, section 214 of the zoning code, which would potentially include a number of lists of things, but we can go back and, if you would like more robust, specific things in there, we
I
could.
think it's always, it's an easy fix. You say, you got to replant a tree with a certain caliber or something like that. Because right now, there's no penalty. And my last comment is on Exhibit C. The redlined addition of tree removal, I suspect we should say live tree removal, because we're already saying providing the process for removing dead trees. So I think this permit requirement is for live tree removal, not dead.
It was really just in general, because I think if a tree is dead, there's language that could be. So this, I hear where you're coming from. I don't know if this section really addresses that.
All right, just
That-
take it into
that level of
consideration
particular,
then.
yeah.
I know it meant live tree, but regardless, I just wanted to point that out.
And I apologize, I have one last question, John. So on page 10, you have this table, and I am referring to line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Outside of buildable area. You have that? Okay. So what I do observe a lot lately is that when, a home is built, they bring in somebody to take out all the trees, and they go to the maximum outer parameters that they allowed. So at the end of the day, the property looks like an empty sand square in the middle, far beyond what I would call the buildable area, which is the house at the end of the day. So the way I'm reading this here now is that this cannot be done anymore if there is a tree outside of the perimeters of the house that is bigger than 8 inches in diameter. Is that correct?
So by code, it's not necessarily just the footprint of the house, but the buildable area is the area in between the setbacks. What I would ask you to do is just kind of read these collectively, because I think it does address that particular concern. The commission did have, or a subcommittee did reference that. So in the next line, where you see all trees that are 8 inches or greater within the buildable area or outside the buildable area, the footprint of the structure, that is why I think that addresses your particular concern of the area.
Okay, yes, you're right, exactly, yes. Thank you.
John, I'd like to, a few other comments, but I want to particularly focus just so I understand on what exactly happens as a practical matter with regard to table 4J, because that's where kind of the meat of this is.
Can you tell me a page of?
It's
Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, I
9 and
got it.
10.
Yep.
9 and 10. And it follows on, you know, what the concept of a tree preservation plan, which doesn't actually appear to require the preservation of trees. It basically shows the trees that are planned to be protected. It does say that it reflects the applicant's best effort to determine the most feasible and practical layout, so the fewest specimen and protected trees are destroyed or damaged to minimize the negative impact. But there is nothing in the tree preservation plan that necessarily says certain grand trees are prohibited from being removed unless a very, very high standard is met. And I want to go to table 4J, where specimen trees, let's just focus on grand trees. It says removal prohibited except as approved by the planning director in accordance with the tree preservation plan, which may not actually preserve all of the grand trees on a particular site. And so there's a tree preservation plan that's presented that says, well, we kind of protected a couple, the other 6 or 8, you know, didn't fit within our building plan. And it appears that you are then accorded the discretion to approve that. And even with regard to the mitigation standard, it says must replant, which I'm not sure how you replant a grand tree, but equal to 100% of the combined DBH, but with the discretion of the planning director. It appears you have the discretion to completely waive the 100% mitigation or the mitigation requirement. So that's, you know, I want to kind of focus on, let's start with the trees that we most want to protect on the island. Does this ordinance actually protect those trees? It strikes me as that it does not, unless you unilaterally kind of make the decision to say, no, I'm not going to approve it because there are no standards or criteria about which of those trees need to be protected.
Yeah, so the Planning Commission did consider all of those things. So this has evolved quite some advance through this whole process. Originally, I think there was language in here that would send any grand tree to the BZA, like something that would require approval of a significant size tree, that would require approval outside of the planning director's administrative approval.
And that's kind of how it exists in the county right now.
So coming off of that, the reason was Kiowa's landscape or environment, that would overwhelm our boards of how many trees that they would be approving for removal in a development. And so that is one of the reasons why the commission altered and allowed to really focus on single trees and allowed there to be some discretion in there. With the discretion, because that did come up during our conversation, and I would highlight, I think, Dr. Kernan, how many times that he's referenced this through our conversations, that in that bottom section of mitigation standard notes, these are things that the planning director would rely on in helping to determine whether or not that so it doesn't feel like it's just arbitrary. So there's a preferred tree density that language was captured from a number of different ordinances. And so I think that was in the attempt to ensure that any particular trees that could be removed, that there's still a greater number of trees on the site that will remain on the site post-development, that were not removed.
So I guess I appreciate the trying to avoid having to go to the BZA all the time, and that's one reason why in the county right now, they're looking at whether to remove some of that from the BZA and give broader authority, but that's a big fight. But then the issue becomes, and we could go through a little bit more of this, the way that the board is constructed right now, its authority is only in one direction. That is, this is applied too strictly by the planning director, then the applicant who wants to take down the tree can seek relief from the board, but there is no ability of the public to have apparently any input into this process of which trees are removed on the island at all. Because the board would not consider, there isn't apparently a mechanism for somebody who sees a site plan and says, wait a second, they're taking down way too many trees. The planning director is abusing his discretion in applying the mitigation standards. I want to appeal to the board to make sure that those trees are actually protected. Right now, it's all kind of one direction.
So twofold.
But there's notice for the BZA hearings
This
with the
isn't
placard.
BZA.
I thought
So-
you just said it was BZA.
No,
So-
that's in the county. Here, he's trying to remove, they're trying to remove it all from the BZA.
No. So it still follows the same premise of Mr. Berner. The Tree Preservation Board would be a quasi-judicial board so those would be public notified meetings of where the community could represent their viewpoints and provide input to that decision.
What I'm saying is there's not an ability of somebody who's not the applicant to appeal a decision with regard to tree removal.
Yes, that would, I mean, if it's you're saying of the board's decision to remove or administrative?
What I'm saying is the applicant, the issue is if the community is going to want input, they see a development project. They said, the community has adjacent neighbors have a concern about that, well, the tree preservation plan that's submitted isn't really preserving trees or not sufficient trees, and the mitigation proposal that the planning director, under his discretion, is authorized to approve isn't really mitigating to a significant degree. There's no mechanism under this, for an impacted property owner, adjacent property owner, to appeal that process under this ordinance.
Appealing because I think the way, if it's going to be like the BZA, especially, remember, these are just going to be non-residential projects. So everybody in the island's going to know what's going on. But they're going to put out placards on the streets saying we're going to have a hearing.
All I'm saying is the only thing that, the way this is drafted, the Tree Preservation Board only is hearing applications from the person who wants to remove the tree, and he's being denied permission to remove the tree.
Or administrative decision, I believe it says that.
Ms. Tillotson just highlighted. So
Yeah.
they would follow our normal practice of any decision to be appealed by any property owner, that would go through administrative appeal process. Then that would be,
So then we're back to the BZA.
So think of the Tree Preservation
That's
Board is essentially functions like a BZA. They're quasi-judicial, so they will hear based on this, they will hear anybody they want to appeal the planning director's decision, and then whatever would be required to go before the Tree Preservation Board. So they truly they are a quasi-judicial body. They will operate just like, so when the actual charter is completed for them, they will operate just like a quasi-judicial body.
Okay, but maybe when the charter, but as this ordinance is drafted.
Right.
That is not what is happening.
Because that probably also needs to be included in the zoning ordinance, because you have a section about the BZA, then you would need a section about the Tree Preservation Board.
so this
Is that in there?
section addresses the section regarding in the that would be comparable to our BZA. I think
Correct.
what you're saying is you would like language that would say, as under the functions and powers, opposed to.
Well, any decision or administrative decision made by the planning director in this, and it's a separate question, how much discretion we really, I'd be comfortable according, because you're not actually subject to any discretionary criteria. You noted that there are a lot of mitigation notes under that, but you're not actually required to make a finding or determination
So,
with
Brad,
regard to those.
I think Exhibit E is what you're looking for on here. So Exhibit E is the Landscape and Tree Preservation Board, and this is also for you guys' consideration as part of the approval process. And this lays out everything that the Landscape and Tree Preservation would do on Exhibit E.
I'm sorry, which one are you?
Exhibit E, so it is, because it just says Exhibit E, it's right before the supplemental,
Yeah.
yeah, so,
Well, and I'm
that.
saying that there, at least as that's, under, as I read Exhibit E, and I don't know if there's more there are no criteria. There are criteria for the BZA to consider a variance, for example. They're fairly high criteria. There's not a single criteria as to on what basis the board makes a decision.
and so that's something that, yeah, we can add, be able to add the criteria, because they do need to have something to base their decision on. So, yeah, we just definitely have to add that.
And especially if you and the planning commission find maybe a better balance between, what the planning director's authority is and what should really be forwarded to the tree preservation commission or committee. The example that Brad has used earlier to saying, let's say there are 5, very valuable trees and, 3 need to be cut down for the house, for example. That to me would be an example where I would really more feel comfortable if an application like this is not just decided by the planning director, but really by the committee. So I think you need to find some way of doing the obvious things, administratively, but then bring it to the committee if things are getting bigger. And again, we are specifically talking about commercial projects here, so there's a little bit more community scrutiny necessary.
And to the-
Oversight, I shouldn't say
And to
scrutiny,
the
just
extent,
oversight.
all the references to discretion, that discretion, at least in my opinion, needs to be qualified or referenced. There either should be limitations to it, or it has the discretion to reduce the mitigation required based upon certain findings or criteria, not just general discretion. As you read this, you would literally apparently have the discretion to completely waive the mitigation requirement altogether. I'm not saying that's the intent, saying that's the way it's drafted right now. Just minor little issue in the middle there, protected trees, full preservation of all protected trees is required in all yards, front, side, and rear. I'm not sure that language is relevant to non-single family projects. But I mean, that would be all the part of the concern is the way, again, this is crafted is you've got the minimum setbacks, 15, 20 feet along the perimeter of a parcel that I assume would be outside of the buildable area. Everything else would be within the buildable area.
So it'll just read the definition section and get to distinguish between buildable area and the buildable area by our definition is anything that's within the setback. So what this is referencing is.
I mean, outside the setback, not within the setback.
The buildable area is what's within the setbacks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
So
I'm
anything
thinking the
that's.
setback, okay, inside the setback, not within the setback, inside the setback.
Yes,
Yes.
Okay.
which is bigger than the house.
Yeah, again, I'm trying to type away from house structure concept.
Buildable.
Because take a parcel 11, for example, the buildable area would be 90% of that parcel, right?
So that goes back to Mr. Heidingsfelder's comment of that next section where the commission did think about the areas that would be in between the building and the actual setback to try to preserve those areas.
So the next line in that matrix in this table, Brad, is actually what helps us to protect from clear cutting outside of a building perimeter, if there's valuable tree. Okay?
Are we close to giving John our thoughts and comments?
Yeah.
Kind of minor editorializing.
Could you
There
put that
are a
in
lot
an
of
email,
references-
Brad? In the interest of time, could you do what also Brad and I, Russ and I will do and put it in an email that saves us some time?
John, you got a bucket full of stuff, so the plan, I guess, would be to come back in February for,
Need to vote.
yeah.
Yeah, I think
But-
considering all these changes, maybe the first reading should be in February.
That's where I was going. This is a lot of stuff, so,
I would be fine.
well, I'm not even sure about tabling it, it's just.
I
there
have
needs to
your
be some
comments. We
time
can
for you to-
present
him to do what he
a-
needs to do, then there's some time for us to
Well, I
review.
mean,
reason why I
Joe-
said-
Joe making a point that the changes are so, would be so
Significant.
substantive.
This is always a difficult area, but they sound that we're getting to that point where I think 2 readings with all of these changes would be wise.
So do they need to table, since it's on the agenda, to take action?
Sure, I mean, that could, yes.
You need a motion to table
I'm okay with that.
first reading.
Okay. So we have
Yeah.
completed the hearing, but then in February, we will have the first reading with all these changes.
Yeah.
And this is in the form of a motion.
Yes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Now, before we close this topic, John, we lost the last member, Madeline just left as a member of the Planning Commission. Would you please forward to the members my sincere thanks for what really was hard work that they have put into this. This is despite all the discussions we had, I think this is a very fundamentally right document. So there was a lot of work, so I really appreciate that.
And this is just more the devil's in the details than it is with regard to the overall substance and structure.
But this
of
is great work, really. I mean, I was so impressed when I was reading this. I wasn't sure exactly what to expect, but every page I turned, I was blown away by the diligence that you and the Planning Commission have put into this. So thank you very much.
Item B, approval of ordinance 2024-02, which is the budget, fiscal 20.
I think you're on item C, right?
No?
Item B, ordinance to amend the fiscal year 2023-2024 budget for the town.
Yeah, I'm looking at the agenda,
It's a
sorry.
new agenda, I think.
Yeah.
This is a first reading, could I have a motion to approve, please?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, discussion?
There's
This is
just
what we had from the Ways and Means Committee.
There's just one little typo in section 2 that needs to be corrected, and I mentioned that to somebody already. So,
All right, so is this where we discuss the new positions?
No.
No.
It's not?
No. It's the same discussion that we had in the Ways and Means. Each position will come in front of us separately.
This is still
Not
taking.
today.
This is
Okay.
taking the same action we effectively took in Ways and Means, which is simply to provide the budget approve the budget authorization.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just for, well, there aren't many members of the audience still here with us, but anybody that is viewing this either live or subsequently, just to clarify the point that Councilmember Berner was making, that this was considered in the Ways and Means Committee. All these new positions here, the council's not making any decisions on to whether to approve those positions at this point in time. This is only the budget authorization. That would be a separate decision that would be made by the council at a subsequent time as to whether or not to approve these positions.
All right, that was easy.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
This is consider approval ordinance 2024-03, health and sanitation. Could I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion?
To me, it's just an editorial thing. The red line comments to me is, the punctuation is confusing to me. It says building materials, commas, trees, comma, brush, comma, and other materials. I thought it would be better to break it up into more than one sentence.
But for you as background, so this is part A, this is part of looking at ordinances where we can improve. And here we have a discrepancy between our contract with Carolina Waste and also in the future with Trident in terms of what is stipulated in the contract and what's in our ordinance. So now both the contract and the ordinances are aligned.
Okay.
Second aspect for you to know, we have probably, in my personal judgment, when walking, in my neighborhood, we have probably about 20% of landscapers that are violating this right now. And basically the town pays for it. So 4 out of 5 landscapers take their own debris with them and hopefully dispose them properly. Some leave it just on the side of the road for Carolina Waste to pick up, and that's not consistent.
Okay, so I understand your comment that it's the same wording, so we do want to keep that the same, so I'm okay with that. On the bottom of the page.
Actually, I think you made a good point, and
Doesn't have to be the same wording, but in the contract, it's stipulated that commercial landscaping yard debris is not picked up.
So I'm just wondering whether it makes sense to have a B, C.
I think it's just the grammar that.
And D. B would be discarded building materials, blah, blah, blah. C would be lawn service related stuff, and D would be other materials requiring special handling.
Good idea.
I think so too. That would be good, but
Can we approve it with that condition?
yes.
Okay.
All right, so my other comment was at the bottom of page 1 talks about a fine for violations and putting debris on vacant lots. How about adding a fine, unless we already have one somewhere, for commingling recycling materials and trash? I don't remember seeing that.
I will come back to you with this.
Okay, anything else? All in favor for that?
Aye.
Aye.
And Stephanie, as we talked about already, we need this change or this alignment to be as best possibly communicated to the landscaping companies. So I suggest that we send out a letter to all the business license holders in that category, but also that our public safety officer at the first gate should hand out flyers in English and in
You guys have already-
Spanish.
Have you guys already, communications department's already put together
Good.
both English and Spanish, but I'm not sure if it hasn't been distributed, it hasn't been given to them yet. It has been given to the first gate? Oh, so we've already done that.
Okay, so it is handed out now to everybody that is a landscape truck passing through the first gate, or?
We've given it to Kika. Now, if we've asked them to do that, now, are they doing it? I don't know.
So our security officer at the first gate, he's not the right person to do that?
I'm not sure who you mean. Kika?
Our guys have actually distributed the information out to all registered landscapers as well as throughout the day when they're passing it out, driving around Key Island. Even at the front gate, back gate, we tackle on both ends. We went and registered and locate all landscapers that's registered in the system. We
Yeah, I
also
understand
email them
that,
as well.
but I think there's a
At the-
difference between who holds the license and the truck that drives through the gate. So I was, especially
did
also
both.
with all the language barriers, et
Yes.
cetera. So I thought we should make sure that whatever looks like a landscaping truck that goes through the gate
So,
gets a
okay.
flyer
Two things.
in the next 2 weeks or so.
So two things. What he's saying is that we're taking the flyers, and while we're driving around, we're handing them to workers. The other thing is that we've given, I'm guessing, a stack to Kika Security. We don't have a person standing there handing them out. We're hoping that Kika Security is handing them out.
Fair enough.
But they have it,
Yeah,
yes.
okay, thank you.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Um, This is the contract that we talked about
With the deputy.
with the deputies. Could I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Any additional discussion on this?
Again, just for the benefit of the public record in this meeting, there was a lengthy discussion during the Ways and Means Committee meeting regarding the diminution hours that have been provided by contracted deputies over the last last few years. And one of the issues that we've directed staff to take a look at as to whether, in fact, actually increasing the level of compensation might be able to enhance our ability to attract more deputies to be willing to provide services here in Kiowa.
You bring up a good point. And also not to be confused with this first shift, 8 to 4. There's a real doubt whether we'll even be able to get anybody to do that. But nonetheless, this is a contract that outlines it. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
So Arts and Council, this is the committee members. Can I have a motion to approve this?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion on any of the members? All in favor?
Aye.
Audit Committee. Tab 11. Could I have a motion to approve, please?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Just a question. Do we have, or do we care, do we have any policy about residents or homeowners serving on multiple committees and particularly multiple ones with kind of critical roles?
No, nothing in our
that I
charter that prohibits that. It's just up to council. As you guys appoint people, you can decide not to appoint that person.
I just would suggest it's something that we might want to look at on a go-forward basis.
Good point.
If they do good work, I don't have a problem.
I'd be taking to its logical stream, somebody wanted to be on every single committee and did good work, that I'm not sure that's a good outcome, but I'm not pressing the point here, just something for consideration.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Now, at 4:15, there's F, G, and H for discussion amendments of zoning and appeals charters and possible changes to zoning ordinances. Can we defer these? Can I be so foolish to ask if we can defer these, or do you really want to? I don't know much about any one of the three, so
We can do this relatively quickly.
Well, and I can say G and H is nothing for you all. I mean, that's just this discussion because you're really referring it back to the planning commission to look into.
Well, H is not relevant anymore anyway, as we found out. So H would not
Okay,
be a
right.
discussion item because it's already covered. What we were intending to do is actually already covered in our ordinances. So
Right.
H is a no-brainer.
Yeah.
F is relative, F and G, I think, are relatively easy topics, because I think, speaking for F, we have a good, consensus about, among some of us about what we want to do here. G is really, to forward what Brad and I were working on over the last couple of months, related to Section 12 of our ordinance book. And Mayor, you will remember we forwarded that also to your attention, what we are proposing. Those are not major changes, but they're important changes where we want more community involvement in decisions, not leave everything to the planning director to decide when it comes to zoning topics. But the proper process now to handle what Brad and I had worked on is to basically hand that over to the Planning Commission as a recommendation, and we have provided, a full deck of these changes, color-coded, so that the Planning Commission can look at it and then decide and alter and then bring back to council. So both are relatively quick topics, I think.
everybody okay?
The only thing I would
Sorry.
add is that, part of that is a pretty thorough look at the uses table, and in recognition of the fact that really we adopted just adopted Charleston County's zoning standard by and large, and the range of permitted uses and when those are permitted in a county as diverse as Charleston is not, those aren't necessarily applicable to Kiowa Island, certainly by right in every instance.
Absolutely. Okay, councilman and comments? Michael?
Well, so we need to make a decision about F and G, actually. So we need to quickly go through this in an orderly fashion.
Oh, I thought, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I
Sorry.
thought you said that was the discussion. We're not approving anything.
F would be approval. G would be forwarding to the PC, which I think is also an approval from us. or
And just to be clear, is all we're doing is approving starting the process. Because at the end of the day, it ultimately would come back to the council.
Exactly.
It would still go through the planning commission, you have to have public hearings, the council would get it, and the council would have to have a
That's for
public hearing.
G. F is our responsibility.
Oh, yeah, okay.
F, we can decide.
Yeah, G is nothing for you guys to vote on, it's just that you're discussing it and pushing it to the planning commission.
Yeah.
And then F would be, really, we just need, I think you and I, what's your recommendation in terms of term limit?
So the background is that I think so F, we are talking F now, is that I would like to propose a term limit for certain bodies of our town, in particular the Planning Commission and the Board of Zoning Appeals, similar to what also the discussion was about at KICA, to introduce term limits for their volunteers and elected officials. I think we want to probably start considering the same thing. And here I would propose that for starting with the Planning Commission and the Board of Zoning Appeals, this morning there were also other commentaries about that, but let's leave it at this right now, that we are limiting the terms, which are currently 4 years for each volunteer, that we limit these terms to either 2 times 4 or 3 times 4. That's a debate we can have here. There were different opinions. I would be fine with 3. I think Russ and Brad were more on the 2 times, which is also fine with me. For community members that are currently serving on the Planning Commission and the Board of Zoning Appeals that would have already exceeded 8 years or 12 years, we would of course allow them to finish their term, but then there would not be available for reappointment.
And I certainly support this, and I would support a 2 by 4.
Okay. Russ?
I like limiting the terms. I prefer this 2-term limit, but I'm okay with 3.
Okay.
It all sounds good, but I tell you, there's a lot to be said for,
What we can,
Until you run out of volunteers.
well, no, there's a lot to be said for, history. There's a lot to be said for,
Well, you have staggered terms, so you would always have,
Yeah.
any one person, you would still have 8 years of
So why don't
knowledge, and
we-
that person probably isn't going away.
So I would bring forward the motion that we limit it to 3 times to start with, see how it works. If we feel we can, alter it, we can. But let's start with 3 years, would be my motion.
3,
here's your 3
3
times.
terms.
3
Three
times, sorry,
terms.
3 times 4 years for Planning Commission and.
3
uh,
and 3 for BZA.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, I did not know that. So 3 times 3 for the BZA, that would be my motion. We have a second?
Yeah, second. I'm all right with that.
And I would simply propose to amend that motion to the 3 years and 2 4 years.
3, 3, and 2, 4.
No, Michael was saying 3 4-year terms.
No.
No, I was saying
Oh,
3 times 4 for the Planning Commission.
Yes.
And 3 times 3 for the BZA. Brad is saying let's do 2 times 4 for planning and 3 times 3 for BZA, which is also okay with me.
Okay, well, with that, but what the discussion is that anybody, any member of this community that's been already on the BZA longer than 9 years or on the Planning Commission longer than 8 years will just
Finish out their term.
They're
Finish out
finished,
their
yeah,
term.
yes, of course.
Finish out their term.
They finish out their term, but then cannot be
I'd
reappointed.
rather do 12 years, to be honest, but
So one of the things, I hear what you guys are saying, I'm going to have to bring this, we're going to have to clean it up actually and bring it to you guys, I think next month, so you actually see it. So if we do 2 and 4 and 2 and 3, you can put in there, make an exception that for whatever reason, if you want someone to stay on for a year, 'cause you can't find it, you can do that, but we have to do that because I also want to believe that it has to be by ordinance because it's in our zoning ordinance, right? Yeah. So you're letting us know what you want to do, but we're going to bring
I
it back
thought
to you.
it goes into the charter.
It's in charter, but they put it into, for the planning commission and BZA, they put it into the zoning. The other stuff that you and I were talking about, it's not in the zoning, it's in charter, so you guys could easily have changed that. But for the planning commission and BZA, I think that's in the
Right.
zoning, so I have to double check, but I
Sorry,
think
I was,
it's in there? Yeah, so I hear what you guys are saying, but next month, I'm going to bring your
so then
changes.
let us agree maybe how that should be worded.
Right, I just need to know
So
what
is
you,
it
terms
3
that you want.
times 4 for the planning commission and 3 times 3 for the BZA? Is that a compromise? Right?
That was, I think Brad's suggesting 2 times 4 and 3
Yes.
times 3.
I know, he was, yeah.
Is that,
Would you
But-
be
but-
okay as a
but
starting
I'm
point?
not, that would be my amended motion. If there is not support for that motion, then that's fine.
Okay.
I'm not as concerned about that going forward as I am about who is affected. So in other words,
and we can show that, we'll actually
3
have the
times 3
list
and
to
2
show.
times 4, we know we have members that have probably been on planning commission longer than 8 years. That's where the 3 times 4
do.
comes into play.
Correct.
So if there's someone between 8 years and 12 years, well, no, then they're going to work out their term.
Sure.
We can
Yeah.
put in the effective date. You can put in that they can finish out their term.
So if somebody's in their 9th year,
They'll finish out
They
their
will
term.
finish.
and the new policy is 2 times 4,
They won't be able to come back.
Even if we're 8 years and they were in the 9th year and they were just in the first year of a 3-year term, a
They're
4-year
good.
term, they've got another 3 years to go.
Yeah.
right, okay,
Yeah.
that makes me, all right.
I mean,
So we don't have to have 3 times 4 for them to be able to finish out their term, okay,
No.
all right.
the only other issue that I see is, are they never to come back?
Well, that's what I was saying, that normally, and if we can put in there that some places, what they do is that they'll
You say
say that
2
they're
consecutive
eligible,
term-
that they're
yeah,
eligible to reapply after
Yes.
they
After
out
2
for 1
years.
year or 2 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's a good point, I forgot to mention that, we talked about this before also, that we put in a little bit of wait time and then they can reapply.
Apply. Yeah.
So we can
Okay.
put that into the charters and the ordinances. Okay. Everybody in favor?
I am.
Which,
Well,
what do
I
we,
think you have your motion, which
Yeah.
I have I
Oh, I'm
offered
sorry.
an amended
Right.
motion, so we've got to resolve,
That.
so
So Michael, restate it then, so.
Well, I think we got.
No, I'm fine, I mean,
You
if
got to
we,
vote on Brad's.
And that's fine, to vote however, people are comfortable with, but I amended to do 2, 4, 2, 3, 3.
that's fine with me too.
Oh, but that's not what I wanted to do.
Well, then,
And I vote no.
okay.
So then your amended motion has no majority,
Well, we haven't.
or no
heard-
second, actually.
Yes, there hasn't been a second yet of my motion.
Second.
But we have to deal we have to do the amended motion.
I made a motion, there hasn't been a second to my motion as
Is there
of
a
yet.
second to Brad's motion, 2 4s and 3 3s for the planning commission and the BZA?
Yeah, I kind of agree with
I'm sorry, there's not been a second.
so what
it
we're,
fails- it
what we're
fails.
saying, you guys are making this very complicated. I think what we would recommend is that because we're coming back in February with an actual ordinance, all you just need to do is direct staff. And like, what would you like for us to do? Would you like to consider
That's right, because we're
2
not
4
actually.
or 3 3? That's all.
Yeah,
3 4s and 3 3s.
3 4 and 3 3.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
We can make it whatever, y'all could.
Absolutely.
yes. No, but what I wanted, yes, and I apologize, I made that too complicated. I just wanted staff to know the general direction we are taking. And then when the ordinances come in before us, we can still have a debate about that, yes. Okay, sorry,
Have we dealt
that
with
was my fault.
F, G, and H?
So we have finished F, G.
G, I think we have, staff have the direction. If you and Brad made any changes to your kind of notes.
I think I sent you the latest version, but I will resend it
Resend
and
it 'cause I
also
don't see
put
it.
it, and also add John Taylor to it.
Yes, and that'd be great. And then the planning commission will, John will make sure the planning commission starts that process. Probably not their meeting next week, but maybe, he can just introduce it because it's not on the agenda so that they know and they can start working on that maybe in March.
Well, it's a lot to read, so.
Okay, good.
So we're
Comments?
done.
Michael?
Sorry, no, nothing from my side, thank you.
Brad?
Nothing, Mr. Mayor.
Brad?
No, thank you.
Citizen comments.
Make this short, hopefully. Larry Warhan, 406 New Egret. I didn't actually hear back from John about my comments about the additional floor. Perhaps someone could get back to me on that. Or I don't know whether you want to talk about it now. I actually have no home to go to. I'm staying in a hotel currently, so I've got all afternoon. But anyway, is John going to get back now or later?
Yeah. John, are you available to meet with him immediately after this, or would you like to talk with him tomorrow? What? Right for this? He'll talk with you right immediately following this meeting. He will
Okay.
talk with you immediately following this meeting.
Okay, and then if I'm not happy, I'll come back to the next meeting.
Yeah,
Thank
okay.
you.
Thank you.
Okay, my one point, I've made it before, and I made this at the audit committee, is I still don't get why we invest over 95% of our cash investments in one entity, the South Carolina pooled investment.
Local government investment pool.
Yeah. In its own report, it states it is unregulated. By the way, sorry, the investments look prima facie fine. The organization is used by other municipalities. Not a majority, if my understanding is correct, of municipalities. But anyway, it is unregulated, full stop. If you look at their accounts, no SEC regulation, no regulation, full stop. And there is no financial support in the event of failure they're very explicit in their statements. There's no financial support by the state of those investments if there's a problem, like a Madoff problem, or say they're behind on, anyway, say there's fraud, say there's manipulation, they're investing in investments that they're not supposed to invest in, et cetera, et cetera. There's no guarantee from the board, from the South Carolina government to make good losses. So first off, I don't see why we invest over 95% of our assets at last financial year end, which was over $30 million in one entity, eggs in one basket. I don't know why. And second, why do we invest in an entity that is unregulated? I've made this point over a year ago. I made it at the audit committee. I think Stephanie, to give Stephanie due, don't always get praise, but you said you would look at the proportion of investment made in that organization. I've got nothing against the organization, but I just don't know why we invest with it, or at least so much of our funds. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
And I know Dorota would discuss this, but more than, if you could, probably not ready to discuss it today, but it's going to be at our February retreat. One of the things she had talked about is having a financial advisor, right? And that would help municipalities, and I think some of those discussions that you've brought up, she can better answer those.
Okay.
But she has talked about looking and asking council for a municipal financial
And we
advisor.
know how those funds are invested at that
We
entity?
know how they were actually invested in short-term treasuries and notes, which is fine. They're great. Yeah. Sorry? No, they tell you. You don't actually know the underlying. You don't really know what's going on. I mean, Madoff used to issue statements. I'm not being funny. I'm not accusing anyone of any misdeed, but...
No, but Larry, let me say this. It also came back to my mind on Monday during the KICA board meeting, where I should have realized that earlier, but that was, my epiphany, so to speak, that they are using, I believe, Morgan Stanley or something as a financial advisor for their, treasurers. And I was also thinking that's something we might need to look at. So as Stephanie said, this is now on the agenda for our retreat in February. And that's where we are going to discuss this. The Rota will give us guidance, and we'll see how that goes.
Could I make 2 points in response, please? A, there's a bit of ignorance about this investment. One of the audit committee members actually said we have no option other than to invest in this pooled investment. We have an option. That was wrong. So there are misconceptions about that. But secondly, I and Alex and Paul Hennessy disagreed with the KICA policy of investing up to 50% in stocks.
It's a different topic now.
I know it's a different, but you
So
talked about using outside
Larry, let's
investors.
do, in the interest of time, let's
Okay,
do
for
one
the
step at a
interest of time, I've
time.
been here and you've been here all
So-
day. But we disagree with what KICA's doing. You know, the guy who suggested using Morgan Stanley and going up to 50%, he compared KICA's investment position to that of a pension fund. A pension fund knows its liabilities pretty accurately, has no emergency cash requirements. KICA could have a storm. It's often quoted to me before that we might have a storm because
Now
we've
you're
got so much
debating,
cash.
now
Anyway,
you're debating the second step before the first.
Rhoda,
So
this is
exactly, but
clearly,
you made the point, so I'm
So-
making the point. Okay,
this is
thank you.
clearly important. This is a subject that just seems to continually come up. As much documentation, as much background, as much, information that you can provide, let's deal with it in February and get it all out to us. But I really like to put this to bed, not to bed, but to make sure that we have clarity, that we can publicize and answer these questions. It has come up before. Mr. Permar?
Just a moment to thank you for your service. Just speaking as one person that's been here a while and has spent this year almost 50 years in a business that has exposed me to leaders at the federal, state, and local governments. There's a lot of criteria you would use to assess a person, but often, and that applies to everyone involved, but one of those is the person the same person in private as they are in public? And I just want to say that you've honored that for our community. And the greatest compliment I can give to someone is that you make a difference, and you've made a difference in our community. So thank you.
We are adjourned.
No vote?
Second.